opening the meeting for the Street Trails and Utilities Commission. Call.
Okay. Chair Pollard.
Here.
Vice Chair Williams.
Here.
Commission members Thompson. Walker.
Here.
Commission member Schoen is absent.
Okay, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mike Thompson, would you like to start that for us? Thank you.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know I'm supposed to read this. Where is it? All discretionary actions before the Street, Trails, and Utilities Commission are advisory in nature, and final actions will be confirmed, modified, or deleted by the City Council. We have approval of minutes. Are we going to do that, Shannon, all of them, or?
One at a time.
Excuse me, Chair Pollard, I just wanted to, it should be public comments before minutes. I just want to acknowledge, as far as public comments, that we did receive 2 written public comments that you should have been provided copies of. Both of them were by Bonnie Slager, and one of them was about the top 10 trails that the Horseman Association is interested in, so you should have a copy of that. And the other one was requesting that the Stuck consider doing trail fencing on 7th Street between Valley View and California. So you have those for you. So just wanted to at least acknowledge we had those 2 public comments that were submitted written.
Yes, we have those before us.
And we have received no further comments.
I'll make a motion that we approve the Streets, Trails, and Utilities Commission special meeting minutes of January 19th, 2021.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard.
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams.
Yes.
Commission members Thompson. Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And I'll make a motion for the approve the regular minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard.
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams.
Yes.
Commission members Thompson.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So at this point, we're going to have the discussion on action items A. Chad Blaze.
Thank you, Chairman Pollard. So the first item for tonight was a discussion on recommending the creation of a trail on River Drive. The Stuck Committee has had that discussion a couple different times, certainly since my tenure, about the issues related to creating a trail. And we're going to go over those fairly quickly. But recently, council had put it in my ear to see what could be done, because they've been getting requests from the public to try to make a trail, an official trail on River Drive, and including putting some fencing up for safety purposes, since none exists in that area now. So staff reevaluated it, and just to recap prior conversations, this is the potential alignment of that trail. If we were to do it, we'd recommend going from Woodward Avenue all the way down to Pedley. It would crisscross the road, and we'll go through why it should, because of some impediments that are residential in nature, meaning encroachments into the trail. Basically, there's two issues primarily why staff has not recommended making a trail yet in that area, is because there are pinch points that are pretty significant that reduce the trail to about 4 feet, putting the equestrians right next to vehicles of traffic, and also a lot of encroachments by homeowners that potentially could be very costly if we were trying to remove them. Ultimately, through some understanding from council that I talked to, just in generic issues, because they asked me about what's been the issues in the past. It's specifically been those restrictions that have been a concern to staff, and because basically there's been an indication that they're willing to allow those restrictions to stay in place, but just put additional signage that helps notify equestrians. But we'll go through that in a second. So we'll bring it forward to you that we definitely think it can be done, knowing there's going to be it's not going to be a standard trail that we'd normally try to do. It'll be one of our non-standard trails that we've now started installing even now. We're doing a non-standard trail design on River Road. Obviously, that's per council direction, that one's going to be an 8-foot trail with 3 to 4 foot parkway. So non-standard, but it's a functional trail. So, I think the new norm is trying to put trails in even though they're not standard and try to make it work. So in this case, here's the general alignment that we have here on the screen, but we're going to go through, what I thought we'd do is to go through some of the other photos that we have to talk about the restrictions. So there's a couple different areas on River Drive that has a restriction. And in your packet, we included this. We're pointing out this very narrow shoulder, and it's not a functionality. We can't widen this. We did it probably 7-8 years ago. They did the bluff stabilization project, and specifically this was designed this way, and it narrowed out, unfortunately, the parkway. To modify this, to widen that parkway, would cost substantial dollars. We'd have to put retaining walls in that slope just to get more footage. And we'd be dealing with Army Corps, because even though the city owns that property, all activities are managed by the Army Corps. So you have to fund that project, you have to go through Army Corps, you have to have a tremendous amount of environmental to go through, which to me is prohibitive to do that. Our thought in these restrictions is we would just take the trail up with fencing as far as up we could go, and then we would put signs indicating that the trail narrows, and to proceed at your own caution. That way folks know specifically that it does narrow to a non-standard width, and to proceed at their own caution. But at least it would be a functional trail all the way through, and people would proceed at their own caution. Similar like when you're crossing a road, you're going to proceed at your own caution. You have to look at traffic, same thing. You would have to, and assume, would look to see if you have any oncoming or traffic coming behind you that may startle your horse. So this is closest to Woodward. This is River Drive between Woodward and Corona Avenue. And then there's another look the other way, which we provided you, kind of showing that glimpse of how it narrows out and then widens out when it gets closer to the other side headed towards Woodward. So again, there's a pinch point. It's not unreasonably long. You're probably talking about a total of about 25 feet of clear. You need to get clear before you're back into the more wide trail. But through that area, we would not propose, this particular one, putting anything in, because it is so narrow that we wouldn't even put trail fencing or even a guardrail, because the guardrail functionality has to be outside the roadway, and with a guardrail it pinches in on the edges so that it's not a direct hit. When you're talking about vehicles maybe hitting it, they'll deflect off of it, so that even pinches in that area even more. So in this particular area, we're not even going to put anything other than signage telling you that it's restricted, that it constricts and it's going to be narrow. There's another constriction closer to River Drive in Temescal where it's wider, where their existing guardrail already is present. So that wouldn't change. We would leave it there. We would just do horse trail fencing adjacent to each side. And that guardrail is really meant for vehicles are not paying attention and driving through and going off the cliff. That's the primary function for that. But that would stay because there's enough distance behind there to still have movement. But in the other area, it's really near closer to Woodward, it's really narrow. And we were really concerned. We're going to still evaluate it, see what could be done. But our initial discussion is really it's trail fencing only, but in that one section we just reviewed near Woodward, there probably wouldn't be any physical elements. But we're still looking at what could be done. Right now we're just looking at it as a proposed project. But again, we have pictures showing you both directions in that constriction here. So those are the two pinch points that we have to overcome. And we basically would overcome that by simply putting signage advising the rider or person walking or using their bike or a pedestrian, because it's a multi-purpose trail, that procedure caution, it narrows, you're going to be closer to vehicles. And that's the way we would address that issue. Again, so it'd be non-standard trail in those areas, and as far as width, and we would advise folks using that trail accordingly. And then when we get to the other areas, which is the residential areas where we have the encroachments, it's basically these homes here. And the problem becomes is that they've encroached in multiple ways onto the trail where we need to have those removed. Or you would have to create a non-standard trail where you're kind of zigzagging through impediments rather than having a straight through shot. So our recommendation, I'll show you what's on the other side and what we're dealing with, but our recommendation is move to the south side. So we basically have people cross at this point over here. When you get past this railing, you would cross over because you could see the traffic head on, because you wouldn't be able to see it if you're farther down because you traffic coming from east to west. So we'd have people cross there to come to the other side, because there's a straight, and I'll come in here to show you zoom wise, there's complete clearance on the south side of the road where we have enough room. So on this side you have some room, but you also have a lot of room on this side, clearance where we can easily put a trail fence a couple feet off the roadway, probably maybe no more than 3 feet. You have some trees, but we're not going to remove them. They're not a problem. They could stay there. But as you move down this area here, you can see it's wide here, no problem. We could put a trail down to this point. It's wide here. We're good on the south side. But then you get the constrictions here. These folks have encroached their decorations, their lawn, all the way down here. This is all encroachment. You can see where the poles are, etc. That's actually city right-of-way. All this is in the city's public right-of-way. We'd have to take out. You could do a trail down here, but then it's wide, then it goes narrow again, and then you get the issues of putting a trail fence a couple feet off the roadway. Now you're down to a 4 foot again the whole way. Where the other side, it's wide the whole way. We can pretty much, there's no impediments along this roadway. We can keep even this tree there. We don't have to remove it. But as we go down this area, we have all these encroachments become a problem. But we have plenty of width on this side. Again, encroachments, you can see this is where the back area is. This lawn would have to be removed. You have a slope here, which becomes a problem if we're going to make a trail here and how we accommodate the residents' driveways. All that has to be considered of what improvements we'd have to do. The width is really back here. You can see the slope really gets steeper. And then all this information here, we'd have to get rid of all these trees. Actually, these have been removed already. That's just an older picture. But we have all this width here, all this way. And then we continue on past Center Street. Again, there's a little restriction here because of the storm drain, but plenty of space back here to cross. Again, all this area on this side, this has all been built into. This should all be way back here. That should be public right-of-way. So we would continue that on the south. Sorry, all this again is in the city's right-of-way, and they built it. We'd have to take all that out. And we thought the easier, less intrusive solution is just have people jump the other side of the road. That happens in multiple areas in the city. It's not unusual. Wouldn't require a lot of work. There would be some improvements in certain areas, like this area here. We would widen out because that's the true property line, and kind of clean up this area. So you've got one potential area we'd have to talk to the property owner and tell them, sorry, but we're going to take this area. We recently did that on Corona, between 2nd and 1st, where we had 2 properties that encroached into it. Basically garden stuff, kind of like this. It's easy for us to just cut that concrete, remove the grass, we tell the property owner to move any sprinklers they have, and we move back the fence. We've done that on a couple different projects. So not a ton of work versus the other side. Very easily, low-level stuff to do. Easily could put trail fencing on this side. And basically, once you get up to Temescal, that's where it would jump back. Again, this is maybe a tree here we might get rid of because it's right in the middle. That one we'd probably get rid of. So there's not all the trees are going to get through unscathed. But basically, we would use and take this all the way back down to Temescal. At that point, we'd have folks cross over. And that would be, we'd have an opening here, and we'd have trail fencing along this area headed all the way down on the north side of the street. So we would continue on. Again, the south side, we don't want to continue on this side. We want people to go ahead and jump over because that's a trail entry point here anyway, down into the river. That's a section people come in. So we want, Temescal made the perfect sense to have trail fencing all along this area, all the way down, all the way to Pedley at that point. There will be some trees down at the end we're going to have to remove. There are some constrictions down here at this corner. Let me zoom in. Oops, went to the other street, sorry. There is a little bit of constrictions down through here as it gets closer to the slope, and there's even some guardrail on this side where it's a little narrower. You can kind of see it's not going to be full area, but we'll just use the guardrail. We're not going to change anything. Might do some improvements as far as if it's unstable because it might have been hit. It looks like it has been hit a couple times. But that's the next area, but it's really not a real problem. And then it would continue down this side all the way to the end. Our recommendation part of the project is to make sure, especially down on the other side of the project, is that we do trail fencing with no gaps for parking. There would be no parking of any kind all the way through this process. On either side of the, let me zoom out, I'm going to go back specifically down towards the other trail entrance where there's common parking down in this area between Temescal and Corona. Let me see if I can here get us reoriented so where north is. Sorry, apologize to people watching online. So this area here is very common for folks to park on. The residents across the street park on it because they don't have a real width here to park a lot. Definitely people park in this area. We've had a trailer parked there for a month or two that code enforcement had to deal with. That was parking that was just basically camped out. This is that other trail entrance down into the river that would be open, but there would be only a gap enough, probably a single railing, 8 foot wide for obviously horses to come through. We would basically do it right here in this area so it matches the trail that comes up through Corona. So it'd be an opening right there. But everything else is straight fence all the way across, all the way down to this pinch point. So there would be no parking allowed in here at all. It'd be signed no parking in case anybody tried. Mainly because we don't want conflicts between the equestrians or pedestrians in there and vehicles going in and out. We understand it might be an issue for the residents who may want or use that as an area for when they have guests, but we feel it's the safest thing to do. So again, continuing on, all this area here would be fenced straight across, no openings, all the way down to the end of Woodward. With the intent is it's really an opening just to get in the trail crossing. We could do small gaps in between, especially certainly at the streets, for 8 foot gaps where people could go in if they're coming out of their own homes to get into the trail system. So we could accommodate them in certain areas, but it's not wide enough for a vehicle. So we can look at that accommodation. Again, today is not about the ultimate design because we'll go through that process to figure out what makes sense. It's just conceptually that we don't have a effective way to allow or create an area where you have like a cordon staging area. I don't know how effectively we make this into a staging area without making it still a parking lot. Because if you have designated parking and staging, there's nothing that's going to prevent anybody from parking there overnight. Other than we could put signage in, and say, no overnight parking, no vehicles over a certain amount of tonnage, but that becomes a problem what if an equestrian comes down there with their horse and or their truck and trailer, and that they might now be not eligible to park there. So our initial thought was, let's just straight across, no parking at all, and just with certain gaps in certain areas, and just take it all the way down. So we think we can do a project. We think it'd be very effective, including the signage for the constricted areas. So at that point, or this point, excuse me, I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts and comments about it. So it would be a project where we would have the contractor, Nova Landscape, come in and redo all the area in cleaning up a lot of the grass and debris that's grown in there. We would probably only focus that removal of grass and material probably only in the 12-foot area, meaning the areas where it extends beyond really far out, that we would not actively groom that other than trying to keep the weeds low, because it's really just aesthetics. We could just make it all dirt and continually have it graded out if we want to, but we try to make sure that it keeps low. It's only a few inches at a time, and that's a bigger question as far as, do you want to see just dirt in here, or do you want to see some semblance of allowing grass to grow but keep the weeds down, aesthetically. But it would be groomed by Nova beforehand. Just to make you aware, this current area here does have asphalt grindings, and so does this area over here. We did that several years ago because it was a very muddy mess that was being created, and drivers were using it to spin out and do things, and it was eroding the area. So our initial thoughts is, don't remove the grindings. They haven't been a problem at this point for any of the equestrians that are using it. It helps stabilize the area and keep it fairly stable as far as no erosion, because water does run off towards that area and naturally. So we wouldn't remove the asphalt grindings at this point unless you felt it was a significant issue. You wanted to recommend that. I would recommend keeping it in place. But the other areas, again, we would put in DG as needed, basically just grooming through it, adding where there's any low points, compacting it as needed, and putting it. We're not going to take out 4 inches of material, put 4 inches of DG back. That wasn't the intent at this point. It was just to really convert it to a trail and add it to the system. But it's a non-standard trail that we would define it as because of its physical restrictions. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Who wants to start?
Crossover sections where we're going side of the street to the other. Are we going to provide like some type of crosswalk?
We don't traditionally. We don't now in many of the areas. You put signage indicating horse, and it would point arrows down, and that's the current trail standard. Is you put we've had a discussion previously under Mr. Pollard's prior questions regarding crosswalks. Is the current requirement is to put a horse emblem and then an arrow pointing directly down, since those signs would be right there, or we can have them farther up. And if you put them farther up in advance of people so they know something's coming up, then you put the distance under it instead of an arrow pointing down. So it just depends on what we ultimately decide of where's best to notify people coming eastbound or westbound that there's an upcoming potential crossing, and then they just cross the street.
Okay, so the crossings, from what I can tell, are at Hillside, where we make the swap,
Correct.
and Temescal?
Correct.
Okay.
There would be gaps in between. Well, we don't. There's no gap in between center, because center's on that trail side.
Right.
But for example, on the other side for Corona, to facilitate the folks coming off of Corona onto that trail system, there'll be a gap there. People can cross into the trail, and at Woodward and any other streets that are along that segment. So we want to make sure there's always a gap, and then we'll evaluate in between streets. Does there need to be another gap, facilitate the residents so they can easily get in and transition that it might be coming from across the street from their homes?
Okay, that was my only concern. Thank you.
I have a concern on the bend there, past Pedley.
Okay.
That, where that guardrail, where you could see the damaged guardrail, the horse trail is gonna be on the north side of the street.
Correct.
That area along that guardrail, that's not very wide. I mean, you
No.
just have a couple feet, and then it literally, it's a drop off. What, are we gonna maybe put some fencing, between that area and that fall right there to prevent, I mean, horse goes stupid right there, and somebody's gonna get hurt, is my biggest concern, and it's kind of it's a bad spot. Everybody speeds through there.
Right. Yeah, keep in mind, and it's a good question. People
thought
use this
that's
as a trail now. You can see that folks are clearly using it based off the footprints in there, and it's a common trail because there's really nothing functional on the other side.
Yeah, it's a bad spot.
So right now it's been used. We haven't had a history of any issues there. But again, we could potentially add something on the backside, whether that be chain link fence, because that's what we have on the other sides, if we feel that's appropriate. I don't know if it's appropriate to put a white fence there because you can break through that pretty easily. Does that help? You know, if is it just a visual thing to keep the horses away from it, and that would be enough? So maybe white fencing would be okay. I'm certainly open to ideas, but again, when you put more fencing on there, you're going to put it far enough in that you actually can put it in the ground. So now you might be narrowing it out, so it's pretty narrow. But again, we can do that. We already have a narrow area in the other places, so it's not inconceivable.
Yeah, that's my really only concern. I'm real familiar with that area. It's just that one spot is just ugly. It's just something we could do to give the riders a little sense of security, keep somebody from going over the side.
Oh, Mike. Chad, I'm curious on, most of that trail is chain link fenced, but that section doesn't seem to be. Is that just because?
Well, it's because they didn't do stabilization down this far. They just
Okay.
did it in that one area, and they haven't. And there's no planned project to go on this other side of River Drive. So
Okay.
that's why there's nothing there, is they didn't physically do anything on this side.
So if we put fence in there, that would be at our expense,
The whole project's our expense.
the chain link.
Yeah, everything, anything we do on this is going to be city expense.
Mike Thompson, what do you got?
I like it. Well, and I agree, a little chain link fence will, it'll kind of follow that curve. If you tried anything with a span that's gonna straighten it out, like K-rail or anything like that, little chain link fence right there, and I'd say, yeah, let's do it.
So in that case, just to make sure I understand as far as because most likely what I would do is I would delete these trees to make this wider and not narrow on the backside, because then you're on that backside again. So those trees would go. Same thing with these trees here would go, because again, we're going to put trail fencing along the front because that's where it goes per our standard. And most likely would remove this tree also, so that it gives us plenty of space and we're not close to the edge. We're pushed close to the edge because it narrows out there, and the guardrail pushes it out too, because it has to have some distance away from the roadway. So that's definitely our point, where if we did anything, we'd have to figure out what the options would be as far as a chain link fence along that area. I don't think a horse trail fence, other than visually, protects anything, if that's Mr. Schoen's concerns as far as trying to prevent people from going off that edge because it is narrow. Then I would probably recommend something like a chain link fence, which is more of a physical impediment, because obviously a horse with the weight could easily break through and it's meant, our white trail fence is meant to break and splinter very easily, so it doesn't become a projectile, whether it's a vehicle accident or a horse. So that's probably what we would do. Again, we have to design it and look at it, see what we're going to do. And at some point when we get to that, when we determine how we're going to do it, we can bring it back to the group and tell you, here's what we're doing. And here's what we ended up doing as far as a design. It's pretty straightforward, most of this. It's just these little elements that we can bring back to you saying, here's what we ended up doing. Our design was a chain link fence that was most appropriate. It's going to be about, 4 feet now between here and there, but we have that in other areas. We'll still have signage that tells people it's constricted, you're close to the roadway, proceed at your own caution. But in this particular area, again, in any area, there's really not much choice. You have to either proceed or turn around. But at least there's that idea. And I think once you get over here, it gets wider, and I don't think there's that need to do a trail, a fence along this area, but it does necessitate probably the removal of the trees to effectively make it wider. Because once we get the trail fencing probably a couple feet off the edge, then you really need that space. But we'll evaluate it once we really see what that width is, whether or not we need to extend that trail, that chain link fence up. But now keep in mind, you're now adding a visual element for the residents who might like their view. They may not be so happy that we put up a chain link fence. But the argument is your neighbors down the street have such an impediment. It's not a hardship. You can see through it. You know, again, when you make a change, people, you've changed my view. This is that. So we want to be cautious of that. The other thing we're going to do on this process, probably when it goes to council, is I'm probably going to notify every single one of these residents of this project and this change, specifically because there's going to be no parking anymore. So you're probably going to have some folks here not going to be very happy with that council should hear from, and whether that's by them calling in or depending if we can meet a person at that time, so that they understand, council hears everything. Because we might be fine with it, but those residents may not be very happy, including the residents where they currently park on their side, between Temescal and Hillside, that we're now going to take away that area that is, they've probably been used to parking, and now they're not going to be able to park there at all. So that'll be part of that desire to inform the residents. We didn't just do something. They had an opportunity to come make comments on. I didn't do it for this meeting because I just want to get the group's concept if you think it was a good idea. We can do that full disclosure and discussion with the people that'll make the final decision, which is the council. And they'll get that process. So we'll probably, again, put letters out to everybody along that roadway so they're aware of what's being proposed. They'll get copies of the plans that'll show that the trail will be in front of their home, that they'll be impacted, there'll be no more parking, et cetera. We'll give them a little information so that they can, and how to contact the city council and participate in the meeting when it gets to that point, which again will be probably pretty soon, because this is intended to be part of the budget discussion. So this will be something probably in May, so I have to quickly get stuff out in April to say, hey, at this meeting there's going to be this discussion. Whether it's open yet for people to physically come in or not, I don't know, but at least they'll be notified. And if it likely is not going to be something, that will certainly have information of how they can write in, participate, do a public comment, whatever it might be, so they can give their feedback on it. But we at least want to give them whatever renderings we can that gives them an idea of what this is, where this is going to go, and the impacts. So I'll make sure that the residents certainly know before a final decision is made by the council.
Mike Williams?
The guardrail that Gary was talking about back there, I noticed that thing swings a little wide when it comes around the corner, a little farther off the asphalt, it looks like in the picture anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can bring it up, if it might be worth bringing that up a little tighter to the edge. That might be one of the 10 favorite crash zones in the city, that we're knocking down fence, guardrail, and everything else. But that, to me, that would give you a little bit more trail. I've ridden through there quite a bit. It's a pretty wide area. I sure understand your point on that. I do.
The guardrail's pushed back. The posts are actually leaned back. The guardrail's pushed back.
It's been bumped a couple of times, yeah. So I don't know if that would make sense or not to realign that and then maybe put a white fence on the inside of it. Because white fences will typically get a horse to detour a little bit. For whatever reason, most horses don't like white. Whatever the reflection is in their eyes or whatever, it sets them off. And they'll, unless they're really used to it, they kind of, But that's just a thought for that one spot. I like what's done here, and I like the basic idea for sure. I think it's a great idea to get that coming around there and get a good solid trail in there and do away with some of that parking like you were talking about. Where we're crossing River Road there, or River Drive there, and then coming back over, are there stop signs at both those intersections? Refresh. Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Both are three-way stops.
That's perfect. A lot of places in the city where we do, like on 4th Street, right there at Corona. Yeah, we have to. go kitty corner to the other side of the street. Can I get you to go back to Woodward? Okay. Around the corner to Woodward where River Drive continues towards Sierra right there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because that is on the maps, that's a trail that is on the north side of the street. And that's it. It's cut off because you can see where people have encroached on that. The opposite, the south side of the street is wide open and people have been parking there and everything else. So the question is that something that we might think about paying attention to take that through to the Sierra Avenue Trail and then let that continue on?
Talking about through here?
Yeah. Yeah, you can get through, right there's the trail
here.
side,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
right.
And then the next street right there is the continuation of River, if I recall, right there to the right.
Horse trails on
You mean up through here, you mean?
Horse Trail
Yeah.
is on the north side of the street.
Right.
And that entire, a good part of that street's been encroached by residents.
And I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, so,
We got many that have the same
uh,
problem.
but, again, you run into the same deal, but that trail, there's no safe way to get from there to there. Obviously, going up, Woodward there, you can go over to Detroit and get that way. But, my question is that something we can maybe take a look at the same time and get this all in one swing and give people an option which way they want to go?
I would honestly focus on just what we're looking at here, because especially if you're talking encroachments, it's a whole different deal. And problems, whatnot. Again, I think we facilitated easy movement in that you come through this area, you head down to Detroit, and then you can head over to and get across town.
Mhm.
I don't think this provides any significant improvement to go down Sierra or a change. I don't think it's a hardship to go down Detroit. But again, I think there's a lot of trails that are probably more important to try to create than this one if we were going to have a discussion. I think this one here certainly takes a very big swath and gets people from east to west a pretty good distance.
Yeah.
We can certainly have that discussion later on, but I think we're trying to do the low-hanging fruit in this particular process. We're not trying to do any encroachments other than I think there's 2, and they're very minor in making this one successful. The other ones, again, I haven't looked at, don't know what it is. I think we focus on, and this is related to access in and out of the river and functional trail going from one side of town to almost the other. I think it's a good, very big positive project that gets a lot of new trail in for fairly low cost. And overall, I mean, it's not like we're creating a brand new trail and having to grade everything and make things new. So certainly we can look at any location. I'll be candid. We can look at any location. But I think for this one, let's focus on from Woodward over and then decide later on what do we want to do. Because I don't think it's going to provide any that much more benefit to look at the rest of River Drive just to get over to Sierra. Because you do have a path directly down to Detroit to Sierra to make that direction. But again, I'll leave that up to the group as far as what you want to recommend to council.
Okay, all right. I think that's all I've got on this right now. Thank you, sir.
Jim?
Anybody else with a comment before I get going? Bathroom break or anything? Okay. I like the trail along the river. What is difficult for me to accept is that there is no parking because I live on the west side of Norco. And if I would trailer over there to ride with somebody, I have no place to park my vehicle and horse trailer now. That not only happens with me, but it happens with other riders that see Norco as a destination and the Santa Ana River Trail as a place to ride. And these people come from Orange County and Chino Hills with their horses to take part in this. The riding is one experience, but these people come here and they also spend money at our restaurants and gas stations and stuff such as that. And if they don't have a place to park their car and their vehicles for daytime use, it's taking a great deal of trail riding away from horse people in this southern part of the United States, or California. I know for a fact that riders do come and ride that trail, and they need a place to park their vehicles. I don't know if Parks and Recreation should be part of this and providing an area along this area where we can have daytime parking for trailers and stuff. But I think it's not only, we're using this Measure R money, and if we get people from outside the city to come in and horseback ride and spend more dollars after their 2-hour ride along the river, along the trails in Norco, and go to our restaurant and spend quite a bit of money before they go home, I think we need to take that into consideration. This Measure R money can come from them also. And not only that, it isolates, like I said, myself and anybody else on the west side of being able to come over and meet their friends, and I have to trailer to get to that section. So it isolates Norco, it splits us off, it divides us. I think we really need to get Parks and Recreation and ourselves together to see if we can come up with parking. Thank you.
Keep in mind, just to remind you, there is a staging area at Ingalls, and that's commonly where people will stage there, and then they'll use the trails and head down into the river system. So there is a staging area. None of this area here is parks, so they wouldn't have any jurisdiction in it unless you wanted to create a staging area that they're willing to create and maintain. And again, you still have the issue of residents, whether or not they want it to be a staging area, and versus their own parking. Etc. So again, I'm just pointing out that there is a place that you can trailer over on the other side of town from where you live, and you can ride from that point into into the trail system. Whether or not that's convenient or appropriate, you want something more direct into the river system. I can't answer that because again, you need a decent amount of property to create a functional staging area where you can do proper turns in and out and have a decent amount of people be able to park there if you're really going to get that kind of activity that you're looking for. I mean, obviously, Corydon staging area, very big, can handle a lot of folks in there, and they can get down the river that way. You go over to Ingalls, again, a lot of area to park over there to park your equipment. It's not short. In these areas, it's going to be more restrictive as far as how you handle all those vehicles, because it's long, but it's not wide, and how you do that. And so there's some difficulty there in handling that. With that said, it also doesn't mean that you couldn't do something with it later on. I mean, you immediately create the trail system, and if then you give yourself time, if you can figure out a way to engineer something that works, then you're just modifying the trail fencing to allow whatever you're going to do in there. So you're going to put parking stalls in there and wheel stops and other improvements that can functionally handle and properly relegate the ins and outs of that area. Then that can be done at a later date. It doesn't stop you forever, so you can make modifications later if that is indeed something the council wants to pursue. But that will take a lot more time to get something off the ground, because there's going to be a lot more stuff to figure out what to do. And then at this point, you can put the trail system in, put it all in place, and then decide later if it's something you can functionally do.
Well,
I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we discuss a staging area as a different topic to this particular trail suggestion. Got a lot of options, and if we brought a staging area up for this part of town, once the new Hamner Bridge is finished, it's going to be a way better equestrian crossing than what exists now. the new trail over by the tunnel, the possibility of staging in Silver Lakes. Cross the new bridge, boom, you're right to that trail. I mean, might I suggest that be a different agendized topic for us to make some suggestions on a staging area for that part of town? And to leave this trail study as it is.
I think what you, Mike suggests is, I think you should carry that comment with your recommendation as far as encouraging the council to consider the creation of a staging area, if possible, that's closer to this side of the river. Because you have one at Corydon that's for that side. There's really nothing on this side. There is a staging area at Ingalls, a little farther away. But I think maybe you want to, let's say, for example, if you ultimately recommend to move forward with the trail system as proposed, but with the additional caveat or request by council to consider creating a staging area, looking into the creation of staging area, if it's possible, in the future to help accommodate Norco residents, but also people that want to come into Norco as a destination area. And that way they can consider that and decide if they want to direct staff to even look into it or not and figure that out. Because at that point, it really is going to be something that we would have to work with Parks on, and they're going to have to fund, council's going to fund maintenance of that because Parks maintains every staging area. So it's just a process. Like I said, in this focus, it was really creating the trail and whether we block off the parking or not. And we can consider the other option, and I think it should go forward with your recommendation if there's not a determination now that it needs to be done now. But you can certainly continue that as a comment that they can hear.
Okay. Any more comments?
To expand on what you brought up about the staging area, actually the Hidden Valley nature area is not very far from there, and there is staging for horse trailers and stuff in there, and it's good access to that. They have plenty of room, so there is, I know you're concerned, but there is areas for people to come over and park. I like the whole idea of this, and I think, improving that area could definitely use some improvement. I live on that side of town, so.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, Hidden Valley staging areas and Ingalls, but sometimes it's not real conducive to, people that come out here and from Orange County and try to find a place to stage. It's not real accessible to them when they know they want to try to get along the river, the Santa Ana River Trail. And I think that we need to look at the money that these outside people bring into this city for our Measure Our money also. I'm happy with the plan, but I'd like to have that consideration of a staging or parking area as part of this trail system.
I've got a question, if I may. I remember something about this was brought up, and I think Councilman Newton brought this up, and Councilman Hoffman said something along the lines of dragging our feet because of the unknowing future of the Santa Ana River Trail, where it was going to go, and that may very well be an area where it would be coming through. So he kind of...
Well, that was different. That's on the bluff side, that down closer to River Road.
Mhm.
That's where they're doing improvements. Orange County's doing improvements, and part of that is redoing the trail, taking people up onto the roadway near Bluff and other locations, so they're not in the river. It's basically Orange
they can't
County
be in the
and
confines of the river.
taking
Right.
them out,
Right.
and then they can go back in once they get back
Yeah.
to the river, onto the on the other side of the bridge, and then go back in,
Yeah.
So that's that area where there's an issue, and that Councilman Hoffman was presenting to council in a previous council meeting as far as just
It's
discussion.
been a couple meetings back. That came across. It had always been my understanding that when the trail was coming through there, however it was going to go, was going to meet the new bridge and go across there and then make a U-turn and go into that viaduct there at Silver Lakes and go across there, which they've already got a trail in there that if you look it up, it says Santa Ana River Trail.
Right.
I've always been under that impression, and beyond Archibald, whatever it is over there. Beyond that, that's where their lapse was. They were out of money.
The biggest difference is not necessarily money, it's who controls what property.
Mm-hmm.
Norco, we control basically everything east of the Hamden Bridge. That's our park,
Yeah.
basically. And so they can't restrict those entrances or in and out, and that's our area. West of that, we control nothing. And most of it's owned by Army Corps Orange County, and they've simply said certain areas, basically stuff that is south of River Bridge, they're eliminating any access to equestrians. They want them out. But basically north of the bridge, they're allowing that system that's already designated by a map that we already have, part of the trail system. Even though it's not our property, we still show those trails, that they're allowing those to stay. They're limiting some of the entrances along that area, but it's still an area that could be used in theory. But definitely south of the River Bridge, that's where they're really saying, nope, it's gone. We got to push you up on the roads.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. Do we have a motion?
I'm sorry. Shannon, are we doing anything with public comments for each item? Do we have a call-in or anything? Email, okay. But not a call-in? Okay. Are there any comments for public comments? Okay. So, sorry, now we can.
No, okay. Any more discussion, or is there a motion?
Okay, I'll make a motion to move this forward and keep the suggestion alive of a potential future staging area.
I'll second it.
I want to add to that if I can, that we definitely look at the chain link fencing on that curve where the steep slopes are, and then follow along with our normal proper signage at the pinch points and the crossings, and that we leave the grindings in.
Thank you. I forgot the chain link fence.
Yeah.
And getting any younger.
One other thing, a step backwards. Do we have any utilities, hydrants, or electrical poles or anything that we need to relocate? Nothing that you know.
Likely we would relocate. We would pay that cost. Widening project we don't have it completely identified. So there may or may not be something that might have to be moved, but we'll identify it when we actually do the engineering.
Oh,
You want to read it back?
yeah. Can I just say that I'm in favor of the project too, with a staging area maybe on this side, the east side of Hamner Avenue for the future?
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams,
Yes.
Commission Member Schoen,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
motion passes.
I'm just going to make a comment that I think the residents over there will benefit because it'll just look aesthetically better with the white fencing. And it is a pretty drive. I enjoy driving along that road, and I think that'll make it even better. So, I love it.
We'll see what happens.
Well, I got a message that we announce email addresses and phone numbers for public comments. Did somebody try to get through and they weren't able to?
Any emails?
Yeah, I mean, it's announced in the agenda, but we can announce it again. It's just the Stuck Commission one, right, Shannon?
Okay.
Want to announce that, Chair? It's on your agenda. So it's Stuck Commission at.
public's invited to participate in public comment by submitting public comments prior to the item being discussed through the Stuck Commission at cinorco.ca.us. That,
Shannon, real quick, is this correct? Should it be 2 Cs or 1 C?
It's 1C.
It is 1 C? Okay.
Yes.
That might be the problem. It's just folks who are looking to write in, it should be just 1 C, not 2.
okay. Thank you. So we're at discussion item B, proposed trail fencing project locations for fiscal year 2021 through 2022.
All right. Okay, so as you know, we've been doing pretty good the last couple of years doing trail fencing. You know, prior 2 or 3 years ago, we were doing about $250,000 worth of white trail fencing, and then this year we got a nice big bump in that, where we were authorized $500,000. We actually only needed about $380,000, I think, at this point because of the way the bids came in, so which is really good. It was very competitive. So, and that project is moving forward. It'll get done this fiscal year on schedule. The contractor's doing a good job. So we're trying to move forward with the next fiscal year's budget. We're going to be going to council in May with our proposed CIP budget. And I wanted to get this started. I think we mentioned in the last meeting that we were going to have this presented to you. If you had any ideas, to email them to me, particular areas. I didn't get any emails on any particular areas. So these are the locations that staff came up with, but I also got some feedback from council who wanted certain areas, but I'll go through these one at a time. River Drive is in connection with the one that we just talked about. Item A is not only when we create the trail, we want to put the fencing in. So this funding would be allocated as part of this overall project. So the first one's pretty straightforward. That's River Drive for the trail that you just recommended be done. Then we have Sierra Avenue, 4th to 5th. We basically have everything on Sierra going south from Detroit done except for 4th to 5th. We do need to go the other way on Detroit, but that trail needs some work because there's a little section of of Sierra from Detroit north up towards River Drive that there is a trail there. We need to do fencing, but we want to get that big section between 4th and 5th done because it's kind of that gap. So we got trail fencing all the way except for that one. We want to finish that off. Then some requests from council independently that we look at. One was Hidden Valley Parkway in order to beautify that trail fencing over there because it's a corridor for folks coming in. The existing wooden fencing is pretty old and haggard, so it's replacing all that wooden fencing down from that new gas station, the Arco that's down there. It used to be Corona at the time when it used to be Figurative Road, all the way to the up till Norco Hills Road. Everything would be replaced in that segment. And then continuing on, because again it's a corridor area on Norco Hills Road, taking it all the way up to basically Valley. And so it's kind of the entry points into the city, making that all white vinyl fencing. So we've added those two large sections in to the project as a recommended project. Then we have Hillside Avenue between 5th and 6th. That's intended to be after because obviously right now I'm putting in a water line on 5th to 6th, and then I'm going to repave that whole road and widen it a little bit. And then I want to go in and do the trail after that. So it's been our status quo of do a CIP with a water or storm drain, then we redo the road, and then we come in and do the fencing. So that would basically, once we're done with the paving, putting the fencing in, it basically is a nice, complete, done road. So that's a desire to finish off that. And then Pedley Avenue between 5th and 6th. Again, that's the last segment of Pedley that doesn't have trail fencing. We've done everything from the river all the way down to 6th Street, and we're right now currently doing the trail fencing that's from 5th Street to, what is it, Dapplegray? Branding Iron. And we went all the way down to Dapplegray, turned the corner. So that's all done, so we have that one gap we need to finish. So that'll complete that section of trail for fencing. And then we get into other areas that we wanted to just kind of complete, which is Broken Feather, from Broken Lance to Norco Drive, Broken Twig, that area in there, between Broken Lance and Norco Drive, Crazy Horse Court, Morning Star, Red Cloud, Comanche, Silver Cloud. Those are all in the same neighborhood. So we're basically doing a whole neighborhood, and getting some trail fencing. Right. Thank you, Derek. And then we get to one that Bonnie should be happy about. She guessed right, since she didn't see our agenda. We're recommending 7th Street, all the way from Valley to California. So get that whole strip done. We'll get that taken care of. And then last we have Temescal Avenue between First Street and to 3rd Street. Pretty large section. And we've estimated both the linear footages that's proposed versus existing that's going to be put in, and then the budget for removal of the existing wood, and what the new is going to be coming in. So right now we're budgeting and this is at the current rate that the most recent contract is in. So those units you see up there is our current unit price that the current contractor has. It could be certainly higher the next time we come around. Obviously, it's COVID time. Materials, supplies have all seemed to be delayed and gone up. I don't know. So these costs can go up. So what we're going to end up doing is, if it turns out that costs go up and we can't cover that amount, I'm sticking with the $500,000. There's 2 ways we can try to get everything in. It's either we find a way to do the removals on our own, and maybe by then, because the contract will include both. It's an option to do installs but also removes. In this current contract we have, we were able to do both, and we needed to do both because neither the court crews or CAL FIRE crews were available due to COVID, and we've used them in the past to help have a cheaper labor to remove all the existing wood fencing. We're doing the same thing here, where it's going to be an option the city can take up to have the contractor do removals. And otherwise, we'll probably just do less fencing. So if it turns out our $500,000, we can't get a certain street in here, so maybe we can't get Temescal Avenue, because that's the lowest one on our list. Then we take that one out. And because to stay within the $500,000, I'd really like to avoid going back to Measure R, because this will all be funded through Measure R, a request from them to say we need more money to complete this, because we can always do that street the next year. I want to be consistent in our goal to try to stick with a reasonable request of, $500,000 is pretty healthy on a project like this, especially considering we're spending another $500,000 on trail maintenance. So the city's come a long way, and we're now putting over $1 million in just trail maintenance a year for our trails, where there really was $25,000. So it's not a small amount. So what I'm looking for mostly is an approval of the locations that we've had, recognizing that our goal is to try to do them all, but if the funding's not there, we'll reduce these locations to accommodate the amount that the bid allows. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just me?
No, I actually have one. I was waiting for Sherry, man. In the past, we've used community organizations to help maintain the fence and maintain the horse trails, such as Bill Naylor going out with the Norco Horsemen's Association. Is it possible to use one of our organizations like that to help with lowering our budget for removal of existing fencing and stuff like that? Because I know they like to have access to that fence so that they can go in and make repairs to existing wood fence, and help maintain it, or at least they have in the past. Have we discussed this at all with any of our local organizations, see if they want to volunteer some labor and help us with our budget?
Sure. 2 comments on that. One, that's normally only NHA that's helped facilitate any fixing of fencing. In this type of project, we need rapid removal of fencing. NHA is not the rapid force. They are a dedicated, honorable force, but they're not the speed we need to go in removing fencing at a pretty significant rate to allow the contractor to do the work they need to do. Second, they have more than enough materials at this point, more than they could ever handle. From a prior project, we gave them a ton of material. So, and they haven't had any opportunity, much, especially because of COVID, to even put in any of that wood fencing to use. So I think they have quite a bit. And I know Mr. Naylor's not shy about asking me for more, but I know the last time we talked, he had a lot. So, because on this project, the one we're doing now, we didn't preserve any of the wood fencing because he had a backlog of wood fencing that he's currently trying to use. So we certainly honor and appreciate NHA and their efforts to try to help out residents who would like to see some of their wooden fencing rehabbed, you know, because we're not going to get to it right away. So they're definitely a valuable resource. But when it comes to this, time and money is an essence, and we can get a lot more done with potentially paying CAL FIRE if they're available, or even court crews if they're available. We have gotten court crews back for now. But I mean, I personally like to use CAL FIRE because they move and they're fast. You know, they're great. And they don't complain as much as our court crews. But, you know, so there's a potential savings there. In the past, we've done that, try to use those two as the primary. My staff doesn't have time to pull posts and remove them. And then we always put it as a default in the contract as an add alternate. So it's not a guarantee for the contractor. We can choose not to provide that as part of the contract. If, again, I have a dedicated resource. This last contract, COVID, we had no resource, so we awarded them to remove the fencing. And they did it very fast. So that's my general comment, is that I wish there was more groups that could do that and facilitate it, but also it's about time. And we need, when we give somebody the ability to say, hey, we need this block done, it needs to be done in usually about a day to day and a half at most. I mean, they're fast because the contractor needs to get in there. So if there's delayed times of the contractor, we pay damages to delaying them. And we don't want to do that. So it's a little difficult. Plus there's liabilities for us in having residents do that type of work. Things can happen and we increase our liability for that versus a contractor that has to have specific liabilities, insurances involved. So, but I understand the idea. It's just not really feasible at this point.
Well, he's right on the amount of material that we have, because I work with Bill quite a bit on replacing the wooden fence, and we're good on that. But I think, you know, how much time do you need to have the fence removed? If you give us a block, I mean, how much leeway can you give us?
Not much, because this, like, for example, AB Fencing, who was doing the current contract, they move very, very fast.
So you get the contract signed, and they're ready to start within a number of days?
Yeah. And they're sitting waiting on us, and they're not, and again, their costs are based off of an assumption of the trail fencing will be removed by the time they get to that road, and they want to go to the next one, the next one, the next one.
Right, you know, that is a good way to go. No
And
delays.
you're talking about a
stumbling
significant
around.
amount of linear footage to remove. Over 21,000 linear feet is not small.
Well, it wouldn't be on all 10 or 12 of these, but maybe on certain streets. So if we have money left over from last year, or this year, fiscal year on Measure R money that we didn't spend on vinyl fence, does that Measure R money from this year go into our money for next year?
Not that I'm aware of. Again, we've always indicated to Measure R that anytime a project is approved and there's extra funding, it simply goes back into Measure R. And then it's part of the fund. There hasn't been a discussion about allowing carryover, you know, so that if you already allocated for this fencing, could we carry it over the next year? It doesn't mean that couldn't happen, but that would be a determination that the city manager would have to make to see if he's going to recommend that or ask for that. But there's nothing given that just because money's not used that you get to continue to use it for that same purpose. So I don't have a direct answer other than saying we've consistently told Measure R that anytime a project is finished and and some funds haven't been used, they go back into the pot.
Because this year, you saved them, $180,000 or more that they were allocated, and what we actually spent?
Well, I don't know if I saved it. It just didn't need,
spend it.
budget-wise, it didn't need, my estimates were higher than was needed. So it just is money that's not needed at this point.
So this year, you're gonna ask for about 500,000 also, it looks like?
Same amount, yep.
And then you have a estimated budget of 462 or something like that.
Mhm.
Okay. 7th Street. There are some hydrants that will be in the trail. Will
Mhm.
those be relocated?
No.
So when you leave the hydrant behind a horse trail fence, what does the fire department say about that?
We don't. We leave a gap so they can get directly to it.
Do we put a blue DOT or reflector on the fence post or anything to indicate that there is a hydrant?
No, you put them in the street.
I know it goes in the street, but we don't indicate anything on the horse trail fence.
No, because they look in the street.
I know some cities do, but, okay. I'm happy with this. Do we have a motion?
No, I had a question.
Oh, good,
Your
Mike.
turn.
Norco Hills Road, isn't that LMD?
It is.
Okay.
Goes Hidden Valley.
I wonder why we would be looking at that on this list then. Because it wouldn't come out of your request. It would come out of LMD, correct?
No, I mean, again, the council can elect to do any infrastructure projects, and if, I think the general idea is that this is more of a citywide asset, meaning the roadway, and not a direct benefit for the LMD, even though they're obligated to, this asset's in their area, but I think it's just looked at as more of a regional citywide concern or issue for beautification, because it doesn't directly benefit the LMDs. It's not the frontage along their homes where that would make sense. It's more of this is an entryway for most of the residents who go up in the hills and through town. So I think that's the general idea, is that this would be a good area to improve.
It's a gateway to the city, and I think that you're running into financial issues with that LMD, and there's no trail money to replace it, so the city stepped in and said that they would do these 2 streets that Chad has on the list.
Well, I have an issue with those fences and those trails on those LMDs and their age versus some of the other streets in town and the old wooden fence that hasn't been replaced, that I think should come first, in my opinion.
Bring them
I
up.
haven't gone and picked that out, but, and then, yeah, I understand the aesthetics of the entryways, but it was just my question on, if it's an LMD, shouldn't they pay for it? So,
They voted not to
that's
continue
them.
on.
That's where they live. You know, what about the rest of us in town? I had that little section of Western Avenue between 2nd Street and Kip's Corner
Mhm.
that didn't get done when you did the Western on that little stretch. And I keep talking about 2nd Street on the west side of the freeway, the Palomino project's moving forward. There's going to be some nice new vinyl trail fence around that project.
Mhm.
And I would like to see, 2nd Street is not on even the Horsemen's Association. And there's people riding over there. The 2nd Street gets some vinyl fencing up there, except for those 3 houses on the corner. Another issue, but, then across the newer, what we can do over there, but, so those were some of my 2 streets that I had suggestion,
Can we add those on to his list? If you have extra.
Not in this budget, no.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford them. We're already at almost the 500,000.
Okay.
And again, we can always create internally our own sub-list. So if for some reason we got a bid and they could do all these and there's still $50,000 left, I can still go do more streets or more trails. But again, what I'd like to have is, see, what turned out is, when we did this the last one, we had a master list on this current budget we're using now. We had an A and a B. And it turned out they could do it all. So we just put both lists together and we move forward. So we can always have a sub list if there's money. I don't think it's going to happen with this one because we're pretty beefy on and we're using the cost estimate of the current contract, which is probably going to go up. So, I would say the reality is, unless you want to take some of these out, the current list is pretty, and again, I think this current list will have a big impact in every location. It's pretty significant visually and certainly for the folks in these areas.
No, I think that's a good point, but like
So, yeah.
Mike said, Chad, do you think that you have a proposal when you think, or how many years it might be before all the wood fencing is replaced with vinyl?
No, I haven't developed anything. I mean, when we started this process, we guesstimated that it's about maybe $6 million worth of trail fencing that have to be redone to do the whole city. Considering, we did about 500,000 over a couple years, and now we've done 500,000 this year and almost 500,000. We're recommending another 500,000. I mean, we're making incredible strides that we never made before. So this is not chopped liver.
Well, you have
So-
linear feet.
But I have not created a schedule because frankly, schedules are kind of, in this particular case, they're always based off pet projects and who wants one this year, and it changes year to year because now that this area's been done, somebody wants this done and that done, so it's a little hard to create something when then it always shifts because of requests. So I have not tried to promise anything or indicate anything. It's simply a year by year basis, and I tell residents to submit your recommendations to the STUC committee when budget time comes around, so that if you want your street, whether it's a paved
A substitute, I ain't got a problem with Hidden Valley because maybe that borders us with Corona. But I'd like to see Norco Hills Drive thrown out, and let's put 2nd Street in there to go along with the Palomino project.
I'm not sure I understand your logic of throwing out Norco Hills but not Hidden Valley. They're both LMD2.
Well, Hidden Valley is on our border, so it'd be
So is
similar
Norco Hills
to
Road.
with the aesthetics with River Road. The River Road.
So I understand, but
Yeah.
both Hidden Valley and Norco Hills Road are our border.
Okay,
That's true.
And they're both mostly LMD2.
but that thoroughfare,
The end is actually LMD4.
that thoroughfare coming up from McKinley, it's a lot more traffic than people turning up to Norco Hills Road.
Again,
so-
I'm just asking, that's why I asked the question, is you felt that was the border, that they're both the border of Norco.
Yeah, I understand what you're
So
saying.
I just want to make sure
So
what
the
you're
Hidden
referring to.
Valley's a bigger thoroughfare.
Oh, it certainly is, as far as length. But they're both, again, I want to be accurate, they're both the borders of
But
our.
and I understand the
Yeah.
problem with LMD too, yeah.
So, just maybe clarification, Mike. Some of the LMDs, the horse trail is not part of their maintenance, it's part of the city.
Right.
And some of the LMD. And in this case, the LMD2, the Norco Hills Drive and then, and then Hidden Valley Parkway, I'm sorry. Those two, it's only the trail fence on those two streets that the city is going to maintain. None of the cities, none of the streets inside that LMD, the city isn't going to maintain those trails. That's up to them. I think that's the way it is.
Again, nobody has
today.
made a decision as far as the council at all. It's just, and they've just, there's just a recognition that the Hidden Valley Parkway and Norco Hills Road are entry points into the city aesthetically. And there's been discussion about, changing of that trail fencing that is already dilapidated in many areas, and replacing it would only improve the look on the Norco side of that road. But nothing has been determined or agreed to by council in any way. I don't want to infer that that's the case. It's simply been asked about what would it cost and to put it as an option. Ultimately, council will have to decide if they want to fund that as their obligation versus the LMD, And certainly most of you know the histories of the LMD, but that's a council decision that they're going to have to make whether or not they want to use Measure R to fund that. I believe I understand the rationale is that it's more of a citywide benefit because the residents themselves, even though they were financially obligated to maintain it as part of the LMD, it really doesn't benefit them at all. It benefits the city as far as aesthetics. They don't have direct access off those areas or direct use of that, but it is something that the developer agreed to way back when. Whether that it was appropriate or fair or needed, that's ultimately going to be something the council will have to decide as a group if they want to take that option. But I did want to at least include it on there so that they can ultimately decide, understood the linear footage, the cost, projected cost for that, and they can know all the information and make a decision. But it was something that, again, I feel that would look really good. It's a long stretch that I think only makes things look nicer to an area that looks pretty poor now as far as when it comes to trail fencing and some of the landscaping.
Well, landscaping too, we're gonna take care of, I think. Okay. Do we have any comments from the public?
Denied.
Yes, we do. We have a comment from Bonnie Slager, president of the NHA. She stated we can pick up the poles, but posts are difficult to remove. We also have another comment from Bill Naylor on the past item. Do you want to wait until the end of the meeting to read that?
I think it's fine to go ahead and read it now. I mean, I don't think it's going to hurt anything.
Okay. Okay, so Bill Naylor stated he waited for public comments, which never came. I know the vote has already been taken, but this is my input. The trail fence should follow the flow of the existing rough trail. Do not need to add additional chain link fencing, so no need to remove trees along the bluff. Should leave several areas for trailer parking and no overnight parking signage. That, again, that was for the former item. Item 3A.
Okay. Or we have,
Don't forget your partner.
it's
Can-
the
can I-
it's the plexiglass. Looks like it.
I don't know if he's laughing at you or me. Okay, a couple of things on this. On Valley View, from Detroit going north, are we putting in fencing right now?
Valley View, where?
That is correct. Towards the river?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't have a chance to go look at it, but it was brought up at another meeting that there was about 40 to 60 feet of fence south of Detroit on Valley View that had been taken out.
That's existing.
It's existing,
about-
but it had been wiped out.
You're talking about the fencing from Detroit down to 6th?
Yeah, coming south,
That's
right.
the existing trail fencing.
It is. What I'm saying is somebody tried to make the trail a part of the right of way and they drove through.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we'll
And
deal
they
with
asked
that
if
as-
maybe they could take a look at that and just go ahead and take care of it since they were out there.
Yeah.
I didn't go over and look at it. I don't know. You would know right off the top of your head whether it was. Yeah, somebody wiped it out.
And
I
we
thought
didn't
it
we
was
didn't get a
adjacent.
report of a TC there.
Okay, so.
Take a look at it.
Well, it would have been could have been anybody.
We usually we get a call just to pick up the debris.
Oh, well, yeah.
Didn't get that.
Oh, so the neighbors were doing
Yeah, they're
Cool.
civic duty. I like that.
absolutely. On getting back over to Norco Hills Road, nothing to do with trail fencing because I agree that it's nice to have that right away into the city and all that. What about the street? I was over there the other day and Corona has kindly repaved their section of the street, one out of the three
Well, Corona-
lanes, but ours looks like,
Yeah. So
it's not pleasant.
the short answer is I already have that as a one of the potential projects that
Okay.
council for to approve as far as doing our half. Corona didn't do the other half. That was SEE did the other half.
Oh.
Unfortunately, I don't know why they didn't make them do all the way to the center median, because we're only going to go half through that median, and there's going to be this strip on Corona side that's not going to be done. So our intent is to do that side this next fiscal year, assuming
Okay.
council approves it. But you're going to see a undone strip on the Corona side in the center median.
Maybe you and their public works director go have coffee and get that little piece figured out, whatever it is. But yeah, you get all that fixed up, it's gonna look a whole lot better.
Oh, yeah.
A whole lot better. Okay. Exactly, at 50 miles an hour. Talk about that later. But otherwise, I understand your point on LMD too. I absolutely do. And I haven't read that LMD, and I don't know if it's covers the fencing or not. I have no idea. But I know that they've got a lot of trouble up there, and the council's pulling their hair out trying to figure out what to do with them. But beyond that, I think it'd be great. I think it'd be great to get this done. Good way to go. Thank you, sir.
I'm good.
Yeah, I was just looking for your recommendation on this list.
I'll make a motion that we pass this as presented to us and approve it. I understand Mike's concern, but I think that if you're gonna do Hidden Valley, you might as well do Norco Hills Road, because it's right there all the same. So I'll make a motion, we do it as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams,
Yes?
Commission members Schoen,
Yes,
Thompson,
No.
Walker. Motion passes.
Okay, continuing, we're going to do discussion item C, tree planting program, verbal discussion. Chad Blaze.
Thank you, sir. This is just an update, and I know, as you know, we've been working diligently to try to get our tree grant program off the ground. We've had a couple long discussions with council on that program and funding and where it should come from, whether it should be Measure R, how much, etc. Ultimately, and thankfully, council elected to move forward with the project. They elected to try to plant all 1,200 trees. They approved the contract with WCA for a lesser amount than staff originally recommended. They modified the program basically to indicate that every location, except for a few residents that have already signed up that don't have watering, every location where trees planted must have dedicated watering already existing or will be put in by the resident. Because if you recall, when we originally did a year and a half ago almost, when we did the first survey to see who was interested in trees, we got about 200 people. So very sad, very small number. But that requirement at the time was you must have dedicated watering. And the survey basically said, do you have dedicated watering or will put watering in? If you said yes, you got to go on to the process and put your information. If you said no, you were said thank you and for participating and and said thank you, but no, you weren't going to get a tree. Because we only got 200 people, and in our discussions with the TAC that was here with all the groups, basically indicated that, the only way I'm going to get maybe participation is if we add watering. So we developed a plan to provide year-long watering to any plant that was a tree that was planted in a residential area that didn't have irrigation. And it certainly was a more substantial cost. It was about $400 per tree to do that for any resident. It was $50 per tree to maintain a tree without any watering. They go out each month and they monitor the tree, they inspect it, they add any amendments to it, nutrients, etc., check the stakes, all that kind of stuff. So certainly a big difference and created a bigger number if you add watering. Unfortunately, we did a second survey that basically indicated you didn't have to have watering, and we only got about 60 people that have replied. Didn't get a big jump. Presented all the information to council. Ultimately, they indicated that they didn't like the fact they were going to have to water all these trees And if folks really wanted a tree, then they should participate and be willing to do something to get that tree, or trees, depending on how many they can plant. So, but they did decide, since we did do a survey and told these folks that we could provide a tree if they didn't have watering, they said, provide a tree to those folks who don't have watering. If a tree is possible in the right-of-way, we still have to determine if we physically can put a tree depending on where they're at. We haven't even gone to these locations to inspect them yet. And if we can, then those few trees, again, we don't think it'll be anything more than 60, will get watering for the year. They will fund that. So they included money in the budget for that. The rest of them all have to be placed in locations that have dedicated irrigation. And that lowered the cost quite a bit. So basically it was about $329,000 that they authorized to WCA to plant the trees. So we're currently working with WCA, having meetings to find out the plan of attack. I think our initial plan is to go ahead and try to take care of the residents first, and within a couple month process to basically say, hey, we've gotten all the residents taken care of, give them their tree, and then the rest of them we're going to try to find locations, whether it's in parkways like LMDs that need trees. A lot of them have died that have dedicated watering, adding trees, or we're putting them in parks. A lot of areas that could use trees in parks, etc. But it's staff's responsibility to figure out where to place them. So that's where we're at with the project at this point. Now that we have completed an actual contract, we're now working with WCA, and hopefully by June, I have to give WCA our master list of folks that volunteered, that wanted a tree. Then they're going to go out and inspect every location, determine what can be done, and give me their recommendation as far as could trees be planted or not, could multiple trees be planted depending on the spacing, etc. They're physically going to go out and verify that and give me recommendations, and then also let me know which folks they can't do. Those folks that we can't do, we'll give them a letter that says, unfortunately, we appreciate your interest, but unfortunately, due to XYZ issues, we can't provide you a tree. We're sorry. Unfortunately, the survey, we couldn't include all the different variables and said, if you have this, you have that. If you have this, click this. We couldn't be that complicated. So we will have some folks that might be disappointed, but they will be for valid reasons. If it's strictly, if there's just not enough, excuse me, room between, example, the horse trail fence and the parkway. A lot of these fence areas only have about 2 feet. You can't plant a tree functionally 2 feet between the trail fence and the roadway, especially if there's no curb. A lot of these places where people want trees, there is no curb and gutter. So we have to use WCA's judgment of what's best for the tree for its ultimate survival. And again, looking at where there's irrigation, etc. And we'll find out ultimately what we're able to do. We'll certainly report that information when we get actual data on what we're doing and how many people we're going to plant a tree. And if it turns out, and we've talked about this with council, if it turns out some folks, word of mouth, they hear about that we're doing this and they want a tree and they can meet these requirements, then we can certainly plant a tree. Because once we're done with the residents, then we're going to go with the mass planting in different areas, wherever that may be, and we'll have to figure that out. So that's the update, where we're at. Again, just glad that phase is over, because that's what was really holding us back in moving forward, was the fact that I didn't have a contract yet, or what the council wanted to pay for. They ultimately did end up agreeing to allow $82,000 be funded from Measure R for maintaining and helping, not maintaining, but helping plant additional infrastructure, which is trees. They are infrastructure. They're important to maintain, because we already spend several $100,000 a year maintaining our tree forest, with WCA. So it is an asset we want to take care of and replenish. So with that, I'll happy to answer any questions you have.
Gary, anything? Gary?
I was hoping we would be in Appaloosa.
That'll be the only restriction if there's no water.
I have nothing.
Mike Williams.
I have nothing, sir. Thank you.
No, I have nothing.
How about the time frame? Are we still on time frame for all this? To
We're
work?
okay. I mean, we have about a year and a half left, and we think we should be able to get everything done by December. I think, again, our first focus is let's get the residents done, because the other problem we're coming into is it's summertime. If we can get the trees planted now for the residents at least by June, but we don't want to plant things in July, August, when it's the hottest month, then it really stresses the tree. And that's what WCA indicated, is they really want to avoid the summer months of July, August, maybe even September, and focus on planting probably October, November, and get the rest of them in. So we'll have a lot of time, staff-wise, while they're working on the residential ones and getting those done. We'll be working with parks to try to figure out where can we put all these trees. And they're going to assist us in that. They're going to inspect a lot of the LMD areas to see if there's a lot of trees that could be used within the LMDs. Because once the trees are planted, I maintain the trees anyway. It's not an LMD cost. I maintain all the trees now in the city. And because most of the LMDs didn't cover tree maintenance. So we take care of that, or the LMD covered tree maintenance until it got a certain height, and after that, they don't maintain it anymore. So there was different ways the LMDs have been written. So that's not an obligation or anything to any LMDs, but we can plant stuff, and we know the LMDs, except for LMD2 right now because the water's off, wouldn't probably get any trees unless they elect to turn the water back on.
Yeah.
But as we know, all those trees pretty much have died. So that'd be a pretty good candidate for new trees, but that's a bigger political issue that needs to get resolved.
Now, do the residents pick the tree they want, or is that determined by the area that they're going to be planted in, where they can get the?
So we ultimately contacted every person that asked for a tree in the first survey, because there wasn't a choice for a tree. And we sent them a link that says, here's the information. We want you to pick your 2 favorite trees out of the list, and it gave them a link, and they can go look at all the trees that have been approved as part of our planting program. And they went and wrote in what trees or trees that they liked. We also put in there, it doesn't mean you're going to get that tree, because ultimately WCA is going to determine if that tree is appropriate for that soil, that location. Plus, they also want to make sure they vary the forest so that you don't have the same tree everywhere. So you and your neighbor may want a tree, but they may say, instead of putting the same tree, we're going to put a different type of tree, because you want to have a variety in your forest. Ultimately, WCA is going to make a determination if the tree that they selected is appropriate. They'll plant it. If not, they will try to work with the residents and say, here's the other choices. We think this one's better, and we recommend to the city. Are you okay with that? Ultimately, if they're not, they have to make one of the other choices that WCA gives them. Otherwise, we're going to default to what WCA says should go in, because they're our expert. And so we're going to try to work with the residents as much as we can. And we've given that opportunity. The folks that did the secondary survey, from the very beginning, they got to choose a tree that they wanted.
A comment I got from one resident was that she, oops, I spelled it out. This person looked at the list of trees and thought that they were all, or quite a few of them were very messy trees. Now, I know we're planting 15-gallon trees, and it's going to be a while before they get to maturity and stuff such as that. So, I guess, Chad, the long-term thing is we'll have maintenance and street sweeping maybe, 10, 15 years down the line to take care of this thing we're going to do.
I hope so. I don't know. I can't predict 15 years down the line where we are with the budget. But I would hope so. But again, the residents are still obligated to pick up. If debris falls from trees, they rake it up, they clean it up. My obligation is to maintain the tree in regards to trimming.
Okay.
They're obligated to water the tree, take care of that tree in regards to that, and they clean up any debris that commonly falls.
Good. That's out there in public now. Do we need to come to anything?
I just thought of something on the River Road trail improvement, or city council initially agreed on planting trees. Still planning on doing that?
Wasn't going to reveal this yet because I'm going to still have to take it to council, but the short answer is no, because we've determined there's a gas main right underneath the parkway where the trees would go, a majority of the way. So now we're going to take it back to council to discuss that item, to see what they want to do, whether or not because initially our recommendation was to do a 12-foot trail with a trail fence along the road edge. The ultimate wanted to see some sort of parkway in there, so they were elected to go ahead and do a non-standard trail and make it about 8-9 feet and do a 3 or 4 foot parkway. And in doing that review with the engineering, they determined based off of the survey of utilities that there's a high pressure gas main right underneath about half that section of roadway that we definitely don't want to plant anything that can evasively grow into that high pressure gas main or grow that way. So, and it will complicate potentially our planting of the trail fencing, planting or installing the trail fencing, where we may end up actually, instead of doing a 3 foot below ground, we might just do 2, so that we're not getting too close to the high pressure gas main. That we still have to determine how shallow it is. We still have to figure that out. We just know where it is. So part of it's doing potholing and figuring out, because again, that's not something you mess with when you have a high pressure gas main, that you're talking about serious explosion if you hit that, and issues occurring. So we're going to go back to council, talk about it, see what they'd like us to do. You know, they want us just to, they want to keep the parkway. They want to just maybe plant some shrubs instead of trees. You know, it's the aesthetics. If you've got trees halfway and then it's plants, does that look good or not? Do you want to just do all shrubs so there's some landscape, or just do no landscape? But it's eventually something I intended to take back to council so they can give feedback, because this was a project directly they requested as far as how it was modified versus what the commission talked about. So I need to get their feedback. Just so you're aware, since I've already talked about it, one of the other elements we just found out, because council wanted this project to be next pave based, it's not allowed in California anymore because it's harmful material. So our engineer just found that out. So that is not allowed. So now we're dealing with a different issue as far as needing to go back and look at alternatives for material. So I've asked the city engineer who told me this to get me something in writing that from the vendor, and he spoke directly with the vendor that provides that material that he can't provide in California anymore. So once we get that, I can at least more confident say, here's what the vendors are saying. We've done our due diligence to verify that this is actually true, but that's what I've been told, at least for now, that's not possible. So which again doesn't, in this particular area, doesn't concern me again, because it's not a steep slope, it's not a high area. I think next pave isn't really necessary in that area, but it was something that the council wanted because it might keep the dust down that might be there or not. But ultimately we're going to have to figure out a different remedy for that. That ultimately will probably end up being something that staff will probably review and come back to this group as far as recommendations, because we're obviously going to have to change our standard, because currently our standard allows for next pave and it's now not available. So we want to obviously modify the standard. So if there's a different product, and according to this particular vendor, they've said, yeah, there's nothing that they're aware of that you can use that hasn't been classified as harmful for California regulations. The only other item I think you could use that the engineer talked about was basically doing a little bit of concrete mix in the DG to stabilize the trail. And it's something you end up replacing every couple years as it starts to be worn out based off of usage. But we're trying to come up with some information that I eventually will take back to council to get their feedback at a planning commission meeting, and have a little discussion item. I'm probably going to take it at not this one on Wednesday, but the next one, to say, here's where we're at. What would you like me to do? Because I need to, it's my budget time, and I'm trying to include that as part of a project and what the actual budget will be. I'm pretty good though, because again, they already allocated $100,000 for the project, which should be hopefully enough, including next pave. I don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out. So if we're not using that, definitely the cost drops quite a bit. But I want to make sure it's ultimately they know about what the issues are and how they would like us to proceed. But I'd like to see if there's any way I can come up with alternate methodologies of how to stabilize that trail if that's still their desire.
What do we have proposed on the New Hamden Bridge?
That's a rubberized asphalt.
Okay, is that also what we have on the River Road Bridge?
Yes. So again, and it may be just a bigger policy thing that we ultimately bring back and start talking with this commission on of what do we want to come up with, and it might be with other items that we might want to discuss as far as surfacing and driveway approaches and that kind of thing, where we might have just a bigger discussion of what we want to do.
Okay,
So,
Thank you.
thanks for spoiling my surprise.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
So that's just my update. I don't need any recommendations on that, but I wanted to make sure that I informed you what was going on.
So if we have no more questions on the tree planting program, then we'll go on to discussion, item D, the no parking on Hamner Avenue.
Thank you. So this is just again another update. As you recall, we had a previous meeting here at Stuck several months ago where we reviewed the no parking ordinance and maps that we were proposing to City Council. Originally, it took a City Council and they asked me to bring it back to Stuck to review. We reviewed that, all those different streets, and one of the elements we talked about was the no parking on Hamner Avenue, which was a specific item that the City Council had asked that the EDAC committee review. Mainly, their concern was the financial implications of what staff's recommendation was at the time was to make it no parking all of Hamner. Primarily, again, because the issue was for me in updating our municipal code, there wasn't anything that documented all the no parking around the city, and it exists in many, many, many places, but nothing says, hey, this is actually approved or adopted by the City Council. So one of the things we recognize we need to do is update that, create maps that identify here's what's been approved, here's where it is, so that when somebody gets a ticket, you could say they adopted it, it's no parking. Versus right now, in theory, if it hasn't been approved by council, you could argue that it's not a valid ticket. It's not, even though it's signed, who gave that authority? So I was trying to create a series of maps and locations and updating some that are antiquated as far as signage and changing them to something more practical is for certain side streets that would be beneficial to have maybe 1 hour parking versus no parking, certain areas, stuff like that. So we reviewed all that, but the one that was still undetermined yet because we're waiting for an opinion from EDAC was whether or not everything on Hamner should be no parking. The specific issue there is there are several areas where there's 1 hour parking. Between 3rd Street and 2nd Street, there is ordinance that was adopted by council that approved 1 hour parking, and it was in relation to that's the auto mall zone. And my assumption, it was done way back when, it was to help to promote the potential sales of cars. People could stop there, park on the side, go into the dealership and look at that. But there's also some 1 hour parking that's north of that was never adopted or approved by City Council. And I had been getting plenty of calls from people who wanted the same. They wanted why can't my business, I need that, I don't have enough space on my property, why do they get it, why don't I get it? So ultimately my recommendation was, because of the fact I almost never see any parking in front of the dealerships, the only seem to be parked there is the delivery trucks, which can park there since they're not parked, they're parked but delivering. So if you're delivering something, you can legally park there. Or they park in the center median, painted median. There wasn't, to me, a big issue of people needing to park. The two biggest dealerships, which is Hemborg and Browning, both already asked to get the no parking removed years before. So now you're talking about just the remainder smaller dealerships that have it, but it's not really used much. So my recommendation, in order to make it easy and facilitate fairness, was simply let's just make no parking on Hamner the whole way. Because there's no way to justify how people should get 1 hour parking when the city's own ordinances say that as a business you must provide enough parking for yourself, for your staff, and your customers on site. No off-site parking. We brought that to council. Again, they asked in that particular only item for EDAC to give their opinion for financial concerns. Obviously, what's the implications as they're the commission that really has an interest in the financial, in coming up with ideas of how to create more dollars for the city, but also same time to maybe not inhibit sales by making certain decisions. They wanted to get their opinion. They've talked about it a number of times, including recently they had a meeting of their most recent EDAC commission where they basically asked, they still had some concerns about which way to go, and they really wanted to meet with Stuck and to discuss that. And my suggestion was they already had a little, what I guess I'd call, it wasn't an official ad hoc, but it was a group of commissioners that we're working with Roger Grody, who manages that commission, to review the issue and discuss it. And maybe bring information back to the full EDAC, which they did. My recommendation is maybe we just take a couple members from Stuck and meet with their group, and let's hear the concerns they had and questions they had. Because they didn't give me any specifics about what their concerns were, what the questions were. We said, that's fine. So we polled many of you to see if you were interested. Ultimately, it was Mr. Williams and Mr. Thompson that were part of this discussion that we had last week. So we met with actually four of their folks. Two of them were virtual, and the rest of us were in the meeting. And we had a pretty healthy discussion. They were, and primarily their concern was trying to figure out their role in this discussion, because they felt certainly that while they're on the financial side, they also had some safety concerns they were concerned about in not allowing parking. And they didn't want to overstep their bounds if they felt safety was more of a Stuck concern and an area. And I think we had a good discussion basically pointing out that both groups have a legitimate equal right to talk about both elements, financial impacts and safety. There's no one group gets to only talk about this. And I also could encourage the groups to recognize there doesn't have to be unanimous consent on anything. You can actually, the council's just looking for feedback. So if the group, and they were indicating their EDAC was split a little bit, they didn't give me the exact numbers, but I want to encourage them that when they go back and talk again, that it's okay not to be unanimous. That is information in itself, that if your group has concerns and maybe they decide, 7-2, that they want to do no parking. Well, that gives them information that two people don't want it. And again, the council can choose what that means to them as far as information. It could be 5-4. It could be the other way. Who knows? And so I wanted to encourage people to make sure that if they have felt that there was a certain way they felt on the topic, that keep that feeling and advocate for that, and that's okay. And we certainly had those healthy discussions on both sides. And hopefully we gave them enough information in the discussion of what we're looking at, and because we explained to them that we had reviewed it, we had discussed it in the concerns, and just recognizing that for staff, I felt there's a safety issue, not for cars parking on the side as a safety issue, except for the drivers coming out. That's where your safety issue is, where you're blinded by those cars, because you have to go out, creep out more to actually turn out. And that's where the safety is, because there's questions about, well, if the cars are unsafe in general, and I indicated that the reality is that the cars parked there, I don't think is the safety issue, in themselves. Like the person driving is going to get hit. That can happen, certainly, because people are not paying attention and they swerve into a car. But I felt it for me, and some of the members expressed the same thing, is when they come out, they can't visually see, and they have to creep out, and they're concerned about that, in that they're now putting themselves in harm's way just to see if they can make a left turn. Where others didn't feel it was a problem at all. They could see fine and don't see what the big deal is. So there was nothing concrete that came out of that in any particular way. It was just our chance for Stuck members to share their opinions and thoughts on it. And the same thing, we can hear some Stuck members without having a full joint discussion on it at this point, unless it was needed. And I certainly welcome Commissioner Thompson or Commissioner Williams to give your own thoughts on as far as the discussion, how it went. I just wanted to make sure I updated the group that there was this meeting. Obviously, I'm not looking for a decision at this point of anything, because again, we've discussed it before, and the impacts, but I at least wanted to make sure the group knew that there was this meeting, what was discussed, and then the participants being able to provide their feedback as far as what occurred.
Yeah, go. Yeah, you bet.
Well, the biggest thing one of the thing I wanted to point out with them folks was that Hamner still has businesses that have been converted homes and whatnot. The properties have been there forever. Not so much with the newer projects, which meet all the current standards for available parking and that goes through the whole process of us and planning and everything else. And also that Hamner is not like 6th Street. No parking on 6th Street from one end to the other, and it's 6th Street is straight arrow, on the curbs where Hamner's not. It's various in shapes because of the way it's been, city's been able to acquisition property and hasn't been. So as far as the financial aspect of things, the Hamner's not exactly striped straight down the middle either. There's one side, the east side particular, after 3rd Street, which is a little wider the way it's striped than it is on the west side of the street. So, and that was some of those 1-hour parking signs that aren't anywhere on, on the books, and maybe they need to be added. And I think they do need to be added. One business that would become a concern on total no parking that I know in particular would be they're using a converted house for the office, and that particular business varies where it's not laid out parking like down farther by the Burger Basket, and then of course what was it, the breakfast place we talked about, Cowgirls,
Yeah.
which has a ton of parking in the back, but then again the street is also a little bit wider on their side where they've got that 1-hour parking on the curb versus across the street where Burger King is and stuff on, just a little south of 4th, and I believe that's still no parking like in front of Stater Brothers. So it's kind of a hodgepodge the way I saw it, and the economic aspects versus the safety aspects. If you're driving a little Lotus car and it's rush hour in the morning or in the evening and you're pulling out there on Hamner from the Burger Basket or something, you might not be able to see very well. But if you're in your crew cab hauling your hay, no problem. So I don't know how we, address that. It had happened before we met with the Stuck folks. I had just an hour before pulled in a Burger Basket, got a sandwich. So, what was that, 2:00 meeting? Yeah. So it wasn't really rush hour at that time, but as we all know, that's kind of the way I saw both sides with them. Safety, one of their main things was safety. They didn't really know how to deal with the business owners other than go knocking on doors, and that wasn't recommended. So that's what I got.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. Mike pretty much covered all the points. Another thing that they did bring up was the aesthetics. If we've got vehicles and trailers and whatever parked in front of our business, and this was our business, and they couldn't see it from the street, how would they feel about that? So they want to be able to have these businesses be seen, wanted a nice clean appearance and approach on Hamner Avenue. One of the concerns that I had, and I was the one that mentioned, I said, if you poll these business owners and ask them if they think this would affect them, and how would they respond, and that was shot down pretty quickly. I still feel like these people have the right to be heard. So if they get their point to be heard, it'll probably be in front of council. At that point, they'll be given that opportunity. But between that and the safety, like Mike said, safety was definitely on their minds, and even more so than economics, I thought. But it was a great conversation. We had good, healthy conversation and ideas back and forth about where this would lead and what to do in the future of Hamner Avenue and all that. So I thought that was a good meeting.
Yeah.
So
And just to clarify, and one thing I told this to the group, for me, staff, Public Works doesn't have any vested interest in this. I maintain the signs on the road. So whether they're no parking signs or they're 1-hour signs, I still maintain signs. The issue for me is fundamentally, how do you allow 1-hour parking for some and not the others? There's no mechanism to allow this business versus that business versus this business. It's because it's not approved by the council. And so I just want to make sure in the end, and I encourage the group, that if you're going to advocate for parking, how do you rectify the issue that the municipal code states that as a business, no matter how big or small you are, you have to have enough parking on your premises for your staff and your customers. And knowing that's the base for any business, whether it's 6th Street, Hamner, etc., justify keeping the existing unapproved 1-hour parking in place. And if you're going to do something, then how do you create that you get the exception but the other guy doesn't? So I'm just looking for that magic wand that says, well, here's how you do it, because I haven't been able to come up with it that makes it reasonable and effective and not overly administratively burdensome to staff, where you're going through, again, you're picking winners and losers, and there's not a good way of doing it. Again, council ultimately did it before. They said, we want parking in our auto mall zone. The rationale was it's the auto mall. You want to promote that. That's your biggest sales tax. Not hard to understand. But at the same time, you excluded everybody else that has a business that may need that parking, and is that fair? Again, I leave that to those that elected to make those type of decisions. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not leaving a hole by leaving, and that's what I'm hoping to accomplish from this, is either decide to allow parking and figure out what the methodology is, because I haven't come up with it. Because that's the problem, is if you do keep those in and adopt them, the ones that exist already, how do I explain to everybody else that why they can't have that same thing? What allowed them to get it in the first place? How's that fair? To me, again, the fairness is simply municipal code says this is what you're supposed to do already. Unless you're going to change the municipal code to have these exceptions, and that's in planning. That's not my department. That's planning department's purview. Then, that's a much bigger discussion beyond that. But that's why I brought it to council to say, here's the problem, and what do we policy-wise? And it didn't seem to be much of a consensus to allow 1-hour parking all of Hamner. Because we put that out as an idea of, you just allow 1-hour parking all of Hamner, except for specific areas that I would identify as simply a safety issue, where there's road constrictions or not enough lane width, things like that. But everywhere else, you could just park. And then that way, you could say the reason you didn't get it is because you're in a restricted area and there's not possibly able to put parking. That's one way you could do it. But now you're creating parking the whole way of Hamner. You're going to get into the aesthetic issue where you've got all this parking on the street, which, again, some of the folks from EDAC thought was not aesthetically good for their businesses. While it seems like maybe an oxymoron that having cars in your front usually means a good thing, but at the same time, you're worried about the aesthetics, people seeing your sign, see what's on sale, but you can't when there's a giant trailer in front of you. So like I said, that's, I think, why council wanted, my interpretation is council wanted EDAC's feedback specifically, is they're the ear of fellow business owners and what's their thought, because this has a direct opinion on them. So again, I encourage them, EDAC, again, whatever decision they come up with, and if they want to do parking, or if they want to approve just adding in that parking that's already there, what is the answer we give to everybody else? And that's all I'm trying to look for in my process as administrating this type of stuff, is how do I fairly and on a written document explain why you can or can't have it? And right now, that doesn't exist. And we're just trying to clean that up. We're definitely not trying to hurt any businesses. It's a cleanup. And as I told the group, when it gets to that point, when we bring it back, most likely what we're going to end up doing is sending a notice to all those businesses that currently have it, saying that staff's moving forward recommendation to remove that, so that they then can come to council, or at least email them, depending on whether it's open to public or not, and to advocate for themselves if they want that parking to stay. And again, it'll be my comment to council is that, how do I justify this one stays but somebody else can't have it? That's all I'm looking for in this whole discussion, is what is a meaningful process to allow it to occur? If we can't come up with one, then it should be not allowed on its face. And that means everything, even the current auto zone area, because auto mall area, because honestly, nobody parks there.
Well,
it's really not a big
I
traffic
have to
area.
disagree with you about nobody parks there. I worked at one of the dealerships at the Auto Mall for a year, and regularly saw customers stop in the street, primarily on the weekends. Browning Dodge has part of Tractor Supply's parking lot and they tell their people to go park at Tractor Supply
Mhm.
because there's no parking in their store. There's the dealerships there really don't have very much customer parking.
Right. But it's because they make the choice to put too much inventory on their parking lot. It's a choice.
Right, it is their
Yeah,
choice.
it's a
but-
choice. I get it. You want as much inventory as you can for your customers,
But
but
the
it is.
customers do park
Yeah.
on the street, especially on the weekend. And that is our number one source of revenue, you know. Yeah,
I
I don't agree with filling up your lots and then having room for customers, but
But keep in mind, both Browning Dodge have had it eliminated, and they're not complaining. Even with their customers, they're not complaining about it. Their parking has been eliminated in front of their entire area at their request, and it's not impacted them. They're not complaining. They want it back. So that's my only statement, is that half of it's been eliminated. The other half is the smaller dealerships beyond that, and I rarely see any parking of cars along that stretch. That's still available. Again, in the end, I don't gain one way or the other. I'm just looking for a way when people call me, I could say, yes, you can have a sign and here's what you need to do it and how to get it approved, or sorry, council elected to not do any parking for anybody and they've eliminated it. I'm just looking for a process, and it has not come to me yet. And that's talking with the city engineer and myself. We haven't come up with a meaningful way, because remember, the city's ordinances say you must have your own parking on site for your customer and your employees. However you figure that out, it's your obligation to do that. So if a new business came in, no matter where they're at, you have to do it this way. And if you can't provide the parking, planning commission's denied projects for that. And so it's just trying to make sure that unless those rules are going to change, I'm stuck with what's there.
So I would think your outlet would be strictly safety. And without a map in front of us showing us, because I didn't run around out there with a tape measure, but showing us the distance between the center stripe across 2 lanes over to in front of the, whatever the curb and gutter or whatever exists on the, on the shoulder side of the road, because it's clearly the way it's painted. It's narrower in front of the 2 lanes on the west side. Southbound lanes are narrower in front of Stater Brothers than across the street on the northbound side, the way the street's striped. So you could use safety, like you've already, you use safety for no parking, like on 6th Street, because it's so busy
And
coming
it's
from
narrower.
the freeway.
The lanes are narrower.
And same thing at 2nd Street, because of the traffic coming off the freeway or the right-hand turn in front of Hemberg's. So there's your out there. That's all safety. And even in review, because mainly that a lot of those 1-hour parking signs start after 3rd Street going northbound on the eastbound side. There's a couple of spots in there that might not be quite as wide as it is a little farther down in front of the Cowgirl. So, so I'm just eyeballing it when I'm saying it's not consistent on
Oh,
what.
no, you're right. I mean, again, because we have not widened all of Hamner.
No.
It's not widened, and we
So-
never will at this point, because there's
So
not
if you
an
stuck with
interest.
safety and you could just flat tell a business owner that, from the stripe, the center of the street to where the street ends, there's physically not enough.
That's only in a couple areas.
Only in a couple areas, yeah.
And again, the question is whether or not council wants to have parking everywhere on Hamner or not.
Well, that's what I say. We're looking at on the east, let's say going northbound. On the east side, it was between 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th, where you had 1-hour parking.
Right.
And where your 1-hour parking was, I eyeballed it as there's plenty of room. And the places where you had no parking, it was absolutely narrower.
Yeah. I would just use, like I said, for me, and I've not minced words with my opinion, I think there's a safety issue when you're trying to leave the property. You visually can't see. I think aesthetically, again, I prefer 6th Street, the way it looks, because you see every shop clearly when you're driving. There is nothing blocking the way between the trail, you see all those businesses. And it works very well as far as,
And I could agree
people
with
shopping
that.
that. Hamner, I think, would be similar. Again, if you drive most of that, you see nothing on the roadway. It's very clean. You see all the businesses, the frontages. I think there's a benefit to having like that, and that was the same thing that the Roger Grody, the economic planning director, emphasized that it would look very nice and clean if it was no parking all of Hamden. It was his recommendation also. But again, same point. Again, that's why I'm assuming council wanted their feedback from EDAC, is that I'm also not a business owner, and I don't know what that means if something all of a sudden disappears. And I'm not, and I think they want that opinion too, isn't that recognizing there's a lot of people that they potentially know that could be impacted, and want to make sure they have at least other folks, including yourself, look at it.
For my fellow committee members, there's 1 hour parking in front of the RV sales on the corner there at Third. And, but that's all gonna change as that project goes through there on that new project for the Third and Hammer. So some of that 1 hour parking will evaporate on its own possibly.
That's if that project ever goes forward. Yeah, so if
Exactly.
it did, we would recommend no parking in
Yeah.
front of, both on, certainly on Third Street, but also on Hamner in front of that stretch of that property. That would be a condition of the project if it went through.
So just for your, drive up and down, make notes where those hour signs are.
But again, this is meant to just give you an update on stuff, and kind of, like I said, we had a good, healthy discussion, and it was really for the benefit of EDAC to hear some of the thoughts from the group. And again, I thought the group for commission represented us very well in giving the feedback from our previous discussion, and gave some other ideas that we hadn't discussed before. And hopefully that gives them some information for them to have another healthy discussion next month, or I think actually meet this month. Now it's April, that's right.
I was just gonna ask, because EDAC has to meet first, right, and finalize, and then it'll go in front of council at some point after they
I'm
make
sorry,
their
what was it again?
EDAC will have to meet first, which is towards the end of the month?
I don't know
Third
when
week
they
or
will
something?
meet in April, I just don't know when.
Yeah, I think it's the third week, I don't remember.
Might be, yeah.
I don't keep track. It's up to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so,
My assumption is what EDAC will come up with a recommendation and comments that they'll give to staff, and then I would include that as a ultimate staff report that would bring the issue back to have them part of that discussion. At that point, knowing I was bringing the discussion back, as I would notify those particular businesses if that was still the recommendation of staff. Like I said, EDAC can come back and say, no, we want to keep it. My recommendation is still going to be remove it, because of the issue I have of how do I tell the others they can't have it, or what's that mechanism. So, which is fine. Again, there can be varying opinions, and ultimately, the folks that were elected get the fun decision of ultimately deciding which way to go. And as they would say, they get the big bucks.
Trying to say your safety.
Again, for me, it's safety, it's aesthetics. That's the primary reason, and fairness. I don't know how to implement. You get it, you don't at this point. But ultimately, whatever EDAC comes up with, I'm not sure. Like I said, they definitely have varying opinions, and I'm going to be interested in hearing about what they have to say and ultimately where they go. But again, it's meant to be just feedback to council, and it could be completely opposite of what I'm recommending, and that's okay. Ultimately, council can decide. Who knows what they'll decide? But my biggest goal is getting something approved, so I have the maps for everywhere else. And just so you know, on those maps, I'm going to be modifying them again, because I have a concern that we didn't identify all the areas that should be no parking that have trails, because there's some areas where people are parking even though there's really no roadway available or shoulder, and because the trail fencing is probably 2 or 3 feet off the road, there's no curb and gutter, but there's still parking there. But cars have to go out in the middle. So I'm going to go back through that map and eliminate some of those areas where there's trail fencing to simply say there's no parking anytime in a lot of blocks. So there's a lot of areas I have to go back and say no parking, but it's always going to be related to a trail that in most cases doesn't have any curb or gutter, and they're using it as parking. In the areas that generally have curb and gutter, there's a trail. Usually there's enough buffer, like especially up in the hills, you can easily park along those areas.
That's right.
It's mainly the areas down in Old Town where there's some issues. So I'm going to be adding some of that. I wasn't intending to bring it back to the commission prior to council approving it, but I wanted to get your okay, if that's all right, and trusting my judgment that we're just going to only impact those areas where there's dangers occurring, people thinking there's parking, but there shouldn't be. But again, I didn't want to disrespect the group of not bringing those particular trails back to show you which ones they were. But that was another one I was going to add on to that since we're doing it. It wasn't adopted, to point out there's some definite areas that people should not be parking.
Fisher Western between Second Street and Parkridge on your list?
I don't know. I have to look at them all. Like I said, I'm going to look through the whole system because I've already seen there's too many problems.
Add that horse trail.
Yeah. There's a lot of places on Pedley, just that whole area should park.
Pedley has been a problem because of the reoccurring rodeos they're
Yeah.
having on Pedley. They're actually parking across people's driveways.
So we're looking like that. So basically, I'm focused on the trail side where there is no curb and gutter because people are thinking that's a shoulder just because it's a couple feet and they could park there, where 2/3 of their car is in the roadway. So we're going to focus on those. And any place that has space, we're not going to mess with. But that's basically what I'm focusing on, is going through each trail and saying, yeah, there's no space here to do this. And we're going to go ahead and just signage them and saying, because they currently will have signs that say no parking in the trail. It's just going to be no parking anytime, no parking in the trail on the same pole. So we're not adding a bunch of poles and a bunch of signs. We're going to double use. So we're not adding a bunch of,
Amazing, people don't even worry about getting their parked car sites away.
Yeah, so we want to at least help we at least want to help the sheriff, because if it's posted, then he can ticket them and it's not a question. It's simply, and again, technically the sheriff can ticket them anyway, because if your car is in the roadway, they can use their own judgment just to ticket you because you're unsafe in the physical lane. You're not in a shoulder or anything that's striped. If you had a limit line and your car's just on the line, an officer can go, yeah, he's fine. But when half your car's over, they're going to give you a ticket. And they can do that now per the vehicle code. But we actually want to make sure we adopt it, saying, no, there's the sign that says you cannot park anywhere on here. And then they can go up and down, just give tickets regardless. So, but that was my intent as far as to add a little bit more clarity on that, because afterwards we were looking at some of these areas going, man, I can't believe this person's parking, or I can't believe this person's parking there. But there's no sign. So I get why they think they could, even though it's not a smart decision. They're just parking.
I would think the fire hydrants and stuff would give them a clue, but they don't pay attention to those either.
Right.
Or driveways.
You mean the one they didn't see? Yeah, that one.
On the
I didn't see it.
Saturdays, literally, it's been a regular thing. I have 2 driveways. People literally parking their car across my driveway.
Yeah. Yeah. If this is coming down the pike fairly directly,
Probably not at least until May, I would guess, at the soonest. Because
that's pretty quick.
Because EDAC needs to do their stuff first.
Yeah.
And then, I need to incorporate it. And it's also going to depend on what we have, because we have budget coming up. And most of the times we've been taken up with budget and CIP, and it'll be up to the city manager. He may say, let's wait on it till it's a little less crowded.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we also may wait, again, until the public can come.
May give us a little time. I've always had issue with the $125 minimum fine for parking on a horse trail, when, in today's standards, 20 years ago that might have been all right, but nowadays that doesn't get anybody's attention.
Right.
So they'll park there anyways. Maybe that's a recommendation we consider making going forward, that
Well, it's always,
hit the code with that and get it up higher.
Yeah, and that's certainly something we can pass along to general counsel. I have to research. I don't know how they establish tickets as far as for those violations. I don't know if it's part of the municipal code, or the city can set up their own fines for that. And I'm not sure, because I have not dealt with that. But I can research it to find out if there is an easy mechanism and it's just really council ordinance that says this fee will be this, will be that, et cetera. Then that certainly we can pass along that additional recommendation from the commission to say, one of the things that we'd like to see as deterrent is increasing the fines for parking in the horse trail.
Yeah, the deterrence is the big thing. We're not going to make any money on it. It's the deterrence that we need to be.
Yeah. So I can research that to find out what's the mechanism the city uses to establish
Great.
its fines.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So one more thing, after doing this excursion up and down Hamner, I come to notice that the fire hydrants the curbs aren't red in front of the fire hydrants.
They don't have to be.
Oh, okay,
No.
they don't.
No, it doesn't have to be. Like I
Okay.
said, it's municipal code. You can't park in front of a hydrant, whether it's red or not. You can choose
I
to do
was
that.
they talked about my fire hydrants, so I remembered, and
No.
some people are choking them pretty hard.
Again, for example, you've got a ton of hydrants on regular residential streets. There's no curb and gutter. What would you paint?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it's just more maintenance for us.
Right.
We're going to focus red on areas that are real restrictions. You know, we don't want people parking right on a radius out of an entrance. You're right there. No, we park, make it red and so many feet after that, you know, so that there's clear clearance for people to move in and out. So rather than just hitting red on everything.
I just was curious, because that would cut down on some of the parking area.
Because in theory, we could always just paint the hydrant red, but we like to keep all our stuff the same. Yeah. So that was just my update on that. If you don't have any other questions, I just want to make sure I kept you in the loop as far as what the activity was. But that's where we're at on that process, and we'll keep you informed if anything particular comes up.
Moving right along to number 4, be commission staff and communications. Commissioners, do you want to start with something?
Mike, now that you've said that XPave has been environmentally thrown out, so we asked for the alternatives for driveways to be agenda. That farther on, once we
I don't know, maybe. Most likely what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to ask probably 2 of the commissioners to kind of assist me in reviewing the current standard. We're going to try to come up with some ideas related to the material for the trails, also for materials related to driveways, with the intent to come back with a bigger discussion at some point once we have information to provide to ourselves and then eventually to council. But we'll review as a little, I don't want to call it an ad hoc because it's really not. It's just really just a little committee that we're going to review, help staff. And I select that group. That way it's not a formal committee that the commission selects. And then it's more of an agendized thing. And we don't want to get into that.
pressure course.
Yeah. So certainly if you're interested in participating in that, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk with the chair and just talk and get an opinion on some folks that might be good. But again, everything comes back to the group so we can talk about it. But it's mainly just to facilitate those 2 items of what do we do about other potential material and doing some research on that. And that group will probably be asked to go do some research for staff, see what you can come up with, see what's there, both on the DG material and potential alternates to the driveways. Obviously, at this point, pavers are not allowed, but that's the intent was to review that to see if that's still a valid discussion. If we want to look at other alternatives like some sort of concrete cement or cement DG binder as a methodology, or using rubberized asphalt or something else. Who knows what's out there? Again, we haven't looked at this issue for many years. Somebody might have that new thing that becomes the thing for at least a few years.
We used to use a bentonite added material
Right.
to the DG to bind. You know, it just makes a crust,
Right.
but it does eventually break down.
Right.
But you know, we would layer it in the fill, especially if it was a wet area, which doesn't apply to us. But it doesn't really bother the horses. It's not like pea gravel. It's just, well, you know what it is.
Right. Yeah. So like I said, that's the intent of the group. I saw a couple hands, so if there's anybody else interested, like I said, I can ask anybody, you know. And again, we're going to do that review for probably a couple months, and then once we have information, we'll bring it back. So we'll certainly, whoever participates, we're going to give you some assignments, and then we're going to present that to the group to say, hey, what do we want to do, and go from there.
I just a couple of things really. Must have been the last meeting we talked about the street signs up in the hills that were peeling and really looking pretty bad. The street corner
Yes,
signs,
yeah.
identifiers. I was up there again Sunday, and there's so many of them. I know you mentioned, you know, use the app, turn them in on the app. It would make it easier for you. I understand that. There's too many. Maybe staff can just make note of it when they're up there in that area, whether Sim or Parks and Rec. I know they're up there up at maybe they can write those street corners down and just start making moves to get some of these, start replacing some kind of a program or something that,
Again, it's sign replacement unless it's an urgent, immediate issue, meaning it's completely faded. It's a filler project for us because we got so much stuff going on. I'll stick with it. The best way to do it, to really get it in the queue, is put it on the app, and again, it's still a filler item. We're going to have it as part of the other list of signs, and we'll go with it. It's usually when there's a sign missing or it's completely faded, and we'll look at the picture and say, oh yeah, that one's got to be replaced.
they're peeling.
Yeah, we'll
It's
go
not
off.
faded, they're peeling off is what's happening.
But
So,
other than that, it's a filler project when we don't have other issues that we're dealing with. I hate to use that excuse, but it really is. I don't want to give you a false impression, but there's a lot for us to do with the limited resources, and we're doing our best. But like I said, the best thing to do is put that item in the queue, and then we get to it because it's been documented, and we have to respond to it.
Yeah.
And I get it. There's a lot of them. Believe me, I drive town all the time, and I see tons of things that I texting Derek on that he has to write a list on. Why isn't this done? Why isn't that done? But I have that conduit. He's got to do those things.
Yeah,
But I really depend on the residents to use what we have, which is the app, to put that information in, and we'll respond to it. And it ultimately, it's a permanent record that says, yes, you did it, and it took 2 weeks or it took 3 months, and it's my job to explain why it took so long. And sometimes it'll be, we've just been inundated with other higher priority objects like, main breaks and leaks and et cetera, and that's going to take priority over those things. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to do that. So again, I don't want to make you think that we're not interested in that stuff. Believe me, I see signs all over the place I need repaired. It's just a budget thing, putting the money in for it, which we can do, and then making the time for it. One of the projects that we have right now, which is we're going to go out to bid at, actually it's already out, was replacing all our residential street signs. So a lot of them are missing or they're faded. Some of them are still fine, but we're just getting a bid to replace them all. But that's just to purchase the signs. That's not to install them. We're going to do that over time. And it's going to be a filler as the guys have time, go out and do a couple blocks and get the signs in, replace some posts if they're old or antiquated or the wrong type, and we'll get it done over time. So it's the same process. We're just not spending the money to hire a contractor to go in and put the signs in everywhere, because we're trying to conserve the money we have to do other projects, to actually pave some roads and other things. So it's going to be a filler thing, but it's a necessary evil because we do need to replace a lot of our street signs. They're invisible or missing, but it will be a filler thing. And so we do understand and we do hear you. I just don't have the resources to just go do it, and because that's the thing that's been pointed out to us today. We just have other priorities, but we will get to it.
okay, thank you. The only other thing I've got is, refresh my memory, 2nd Street eastbound onto the southbound 15. They're doing the work in front of Burger King in that strip mall right now. What exactly is going on there? Is that a turn lane, or they're trying?
They're widening it to make a dedicated turn lane to go southbound.
Okay.
And then once that's done, they're going to be resurfacing the whole section between Hamner and the on-ramp. So everything width-wise will be redone and resurfaced, so that'll be all finished.
Is there going to be a continuation of the sidewalk that stops right there at that driveway?
Yes, it actually will continue all the way underneath, because one of the requirements Caltrans made me do is actually build their new sidewalk that's going to go all the way under the bridge.
Okay, all right.
So I
Yeah.
get to pay for that.
Yeah.
All the way to the east side. Yeah, all the way to the east side of to the existing
Cool.
curb and driveway approach, or ramp approach that was put down on the new on-ramp that was done.
Is CarMax doing they must be doing the sidewalk where the old dead-end trail was?
Correct.
Right there. And they're not going to do the one that goes under the freeway?
No, that's not their requirement.
Could be.
Not anymore.
All right. All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
They're still in plan check. They've been submitting plans pretty regularly, both on the utilities and the buildings. They're moving forward, hopefully soon, to maybe start doing demolition of all the homes. They've submitted their permits for demolition, so they'll go through that process, hopefully the next few months. Like I said, we're about ready to issue those permits, but we have to work with them regarding doing inspections, et cetera, on that project. So, and they're also going to abandon all the utilities that are in the street for water and sewer at the same time, because we don't want them to demo the buildings and then we lose track where all the utilities were. We want all that to be abandoned properly and removed. So they've got some extra work that they get to do that they weren't planning on, but that's, again, we want to make sure we don't get negatively impacted by their operation. So, but we're working well together and they're moving forward.
Just had my question answered.
Maybe continuing on with Sherry's question, I know they have different phases for that project. Will all the streets and trails have to be completed in the first phase of that project, Chad?
Correct.
So if they don't continue on with anything else, everything, traffic signals, sidewalks, curbs, trails, will be completed?
Correct. They can't go to phase 2 unless all the utilities and streets are done. The only exception to that, I'll put this already out there, is that there is a storm channel that goes through that property. That area we're currently in design to improve and widen and deepen with flood control. So the contractor for Caprock is likely to go well before we go and redo the storm drain the channel that goes through there. So ultimately the contractor may do only a certain amount up to the channel on both sides, and then the contract for flood control will finish that section. So it may be wide up to the channel, and then it narrows out, and then goes wide again. Flood control will handle that section when they do that work, because it doesn't make sense to do it. The contractor can't do anything now because of that restriction. So when I say they have to have it all done, there's those two areas on First Street and on Mountain. Those two channel crossings is where there will likely not be 100% of the street widening or road work done. They will do a basic resurfacing in the meantime, so it's a good surface, but it's ultimately going to be torn up when we redo that project, because the city's managing that project. We've hired Michael Baker to design it, and we're working with Flood Control, who's funding it. And we've already had the developer meet with Flood Control and Michael Baker to review their plans of what they're planning to do versus what Flood Control is planning to do with our design, and so that they all match and make sense. So we've already identified some areas we need to look at, redesign. So we've got the two parties working together, knowing that they're going to be involving each other.
And then going back months when we put our comments in on that project, one of mine was on Mountain, going south to First Street. When you cross that channel, that road, I'm not sure if I said it right. I said the hill between the channel and First Street makes it a blind section right there. If some of that can be lowered down. So if you turn in,
it's going to be lowered a little bit, but not much.
no, but it's, if you understand what I'm saying, if you turn off of First Street on the Mountain going northbound, you can't see cars coming southbound on Mountain.
But again, you're in an opposite lane, so it shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Unless you're in the wrong lane, it should be okay. I understand your point.
Common sense, stupidity. Okay. I think there's a safety issue there.
Yeah.
Because now we're going to get trucks going in there, and they can make a wider turn possibly coming out of the project or going off of First Street onto Mountain.
But it's going to be a 4-lane road on Mountain.
4-lane from the flood control channel to First Street,
All the way.
except for where the channel is.
All the way. But we've got again, you're talking about two separate projects. Caprock's going to do their work except for the channel. They're going to widen it all the way to First Street, except for where the channel is on Mountain.
4 lanes.
4 lanes. And then the flood control project, which the city has, it will finish off that section so it's all 4 lanes. It's just, again, because of that requirement, Caprock can only do so much to each side, but they'll build 4 lanes and 4 lanes. Initially, the section between First and the flood control zone will only be 1 lane going northbound, because you can't have 2 lanes and then it restricts. So they're automatically making it 1 lane right from the corner, with striping that says it's just one lane. When that flood control is done, then they can stripe the second lane, and now it'll have 2 lanes.
Okay. And then, going back to Second Street on the project, that's gonna be, Caprock's gonna put in curb and gutter along there,
Both sides.
both sides. And that was my question was, we got them to do that. And, the, what is it, 3 or 4 houses that are still gonna stay residential on the project side, the south side of, Second Street.
Right.
The trees, will they come out? Did we talk to the
Some of
residents?
them will come out.
And the horse trail will be common,
Yeah, it'll go through there. We're basically gonna we're gonna move the trees to facilitate the horse trail. That section of roadway will be widened as much as we can, and to facilitate that, those trees have to go. Because the contractor's taking out all the trees anyway. Those would be the only eucalyptus left on that in front of those homes. So we're gonna remove those 2, and the trail's gonna meander around those homes and then back into the trail. So there'll be a functional trail there. It'll be a little narrow. It's probably gonna be maybe 10 feet. I think we looked at in the designs, because of just we all have limited distance to deal with, but it'll be a functional trail.
and curb and gutter, concrete curb and gutter on the north side too.
Yep.
And then we'll get a horse trails through Second Street next year. Okay, thank you. Any more from commission? Good, Gary. Okay, how about from staff? Derek, do you have anything for us? Nothing? All those miles you put on going around the city? Come on. He wants to go home. Sam, do you have something? You haven't had a shot yet. Shannon, how about you? Okay, with that, I
Real
just
quick, because you skipped me again. Don't skip me. Just one comment. I wanted to,
Not on purpose, you know.
if you haven't seen it, well, he did it to you. If you haven't seen it yet, we have put up the brand new sign that
yes.
honors Terry Perkowski.
Yes.
As far as at the yard, the council, as a previous session, did agree to rename the Public Works yard after Terry, after his passing. So we do now have the new signage in front of the Public Works yard on 5th Street. So if you haven't seen it, feel free to drive by. It's a nice, basically billboard that has his name on it, and also has his signature catchphrase that's on there that he told us every day. Every day. And with a straight face, he said it. So, so we appreciate that about him. So if you haven't seen it, please go by and look at it. It's really nice.
Well, thanks
you.
for bringing that up too. And on that note, I'd like to just thank the rest of your staff and everybody that works behind the scenes and doesn't get the pleasure of coming out here every other month and visiting with us. Make sure they get thanked too. With that, I think we'll adjourn.